Welcome to Stories for Sleep, your perfect escape into a world of peaceful dreams. Are you tired after a long day and looking for something calming to help you drift off? Or perhaps you enjoy a gentle story to soothe your mind before bed? You've come to the right place. Here at Stories for Sleep, we bring you enchanting tales that will take you on relaxing journeys through mysterious lands, cozy corners, and magical worlds. Bring calming bedtime stories to peaceful lullabies. Our stories are designed to help you unwind and enjoy a deep, restful sleep. So, if you want to make your nights more peaceful and your sleep more rejuvenating, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for your regular dose of soothing tales. Let us guide you into the world of dreams, one story at a time. On a cold, silent night, Mia stood at the edge of the cliff, staring at the old lighthouse. Its tall, worn-out structure rose against the dark sky, and a faint glow flickered at the top, even though it had been abandoned for years. The waves crashed against the rocks below, their sound mixing with the eerie silence of the night. Mia had heard stories about this lighthouse, a place where sailors claimed to hear whispers in the wind. But tonight, something felt different. The glow seemed to call her, urging her to come closer. Gathering her courage, Mia decided to step towards the path leading to the lighthouse. As she walked, the trees around her swayed gently, their branches casting shadows that looked like hands reaching out to her. A strange chill ran down her spine, but curiosity pushed her forward. She couldn't shake the feeling that the lighthouse held a secret, one that had waited years to be discovered. Reaching the lighthouse, Mia noticed the large wooden door, cracked and covered with moss. She tried pushing it, but it wouldn't budge. A sudden gust of wind blew past her, carrying what sounded like a faint whisper. Leave. Or stay forever, the words seemed to say. Mia's heart raced, but she shook her head, convincing herself it was just the wind. She looked around and found an old metal key lying on the ground, as if it had been waiting for her. With trembling hands, Mia inserted the key into the rusty lock. The door creaked open, revealing a spiral staircase winding up into darkness. The air inside was damp, and the faint scent of seaweed filled her nose. As she stepped inside, her footsteps echoed, but she couldn't help feeling like she wasn't alone. She glanced over her shoulder, but the only thing behind her was the open door, swaying slightly in the wind. Climbing the stairs, Mia noticed strange carvings on the walls. Symbols she couldn't understand lined the stone, glowing faintly in the dim light. Each step she took made a hollow, echoing sound, but occasionally she heard an extra step, like someone was following her. "Hello," she called out, her voice shaking. Only silence replied, broken by the occasional crash of waves outside. As she reached halfway up, she found an old lantern resting on a step. Lighting it, she saw a shadow flicker on the wall, moving though she had not moved. Her breath quickened as she whispered to herself, "It's just my imagination." But deep down, she knew something about this place was alive, watching her every move. At the top of the stairs, Mia found a room filled with old furniture covered in dust. A large window overlooked the restless sea, and the faint glow she had seen earlier now pulsed softly in the corner. It came from a small box sitting on a table. The whispers grew louder as she approached it, but the words were still too faint to understand. Her fingers hovered over the box, and the whispers stopped, replaced by silence so heavy it felt like the air had frozen. When she opened the box, she found an old journal inside. Its pages were filled with notes about the lighthouse and the shadows that lived within it. The final entry read, "Whoever opens this must break the curse." or they too will join the whispers. Mia felt her legs weaken as she stared at the words. Suddenly, the shadows in the room began to shift, closing in around her. Realizing she had to leave, Mia grabbed the journal and ran towards the stairs. The shadows followed, their whispers turning into frantic cries. The staircase felt longer on the way down, as if the lighthouse was trying to trap her inside. She tripped, falling onto the cold, hard floor at the base of the stairs. The front door swung shut with a loud bang, locking her in. Desperate, she remembered the symbols she had seen on the walls. Flipping through the journal, she found a drawing of the same symbols with instructions to recite an old phrase. With shaking hands, she chanted the words. The shadows screamed and retreated, the door unlocking with a loud click. Mia ran outside, the whispers fading as the lighthouse went dark once more. Clutching the journal, she vowed never to return, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that the lighthouse wasn't done with her yet. As Mia ran through the forest, the lighthouse loomed behind her, its dark silhouette blending with the night sky. She paused to catch her breath, clutching the journal tightly to her chest. The whispers were gone, but now faint visions began to dance in her mind of sailors lost at sea, their cries for help echoing in the waves. The lighthouse was supposed to guide them, but instead it had drawn them to their doom. Shaking her head, Mia tried to push the images away. She knew the journal held answers, but the thought of opening it again terrified her. Just then, she noticed a faint figure standing in the distance, near the edge of the forest. It was still, as if waiting for her. A chill ran down her spine, but curiosity pushed her forward once more. The figure was cloaked in shadow, its face hidden beneath a hood. As Mia approached, it raised a hand, pointing towards the lighthouse. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice like the rustling of leaves. Mia froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The figure did not answer but instead stepped closer, revealing pale, hollow eyes that seemed to look right through her. "The curse binds you now," it said. To break it, you must uncover the final truth. Before Mia could respond, the figure dissolved into the mist, leaving behind an icy silence. Trembling, she realized that running away was no longer an option. Determined to find answers, Mia turned back towards the lighthouse, gripping the journal tightly. She climbed the spiral staircase once again, the air feeling heavier with every step. This time, she noticed something she hadn't before: a crack in the wall, just wide enough to hide a small door. She pushed against it, and it creaked open, revealing a narrow passage that led deeper into the structure. The passage was damp and cold, the walls lined with more glowing symbols. At the end of the hallway, she found an ancient room with a single pedestal in the center. On it lay an old compass, its needle spinning wildly. The journal's last pages had mentioned the compass. It was said to hold the power to end the curse, but only if the truth was spoken aloud. Mia picked up the compass, its weight cold and heavy in her hands. The whispers returned, louder this time, swirling around her like a storm. "Speak the truth," they demanded. She flipped through the journal, her fingers trembling as she found the final entry. It told of a lighthouse keeper who had betrayed the sailors, luring them to their deaths in exchange for immortality. His soul was trapped within the lighthouse, bound to the shadows he had created. Realizing what she had to do, Mia spoke the words written in the journal: "Your secret is no longer hidden." The world will know your betrayal. The room shook violently, the whispers turning into deafening screams. The shadows around her dissolved into light, and the compass's needle stopped spinning, pointing firmly north. The light from the compass spread throughout the lighthouse, filling every corner with warmth. Mia felt the weight lift from her chest as the shadows vanished, leaving behind a profound silence. She walked back up the stairs to find the once flickering light at the top glowing steadily, as if the lighthouse had finally been freed from its curse. Stepping outside, Mia looked back at the towering structure. The whispers were gone, and the air felt lighter, as though the forest itself had been released from a heavy burden. Clutching the journal, she walked away, knowing she had uncovered the truth and broken the cycle. But as she reached the edge of the forest, a faint light flickered at the top of the lighthouse once more, as if to remind her that some secrets can never truly be forgotten. Mia thought the nightmare was over, but as she reached her home, she felt an unease settle in her chest. That night, while sitting by the window, her eyes were drawn back to the lighthouse in the distance. To her horror, the light at the top flickered on and off, casting strange patterns over the sea. The journal sat on her table, its pages now blank, as if the story had vanished. Unable to sleep, Mia decided to return to the lighthouse, hoping to find closure. The path seemed darker than before, and the forest whispered in tones she couldn't understand. Each step felt like it dragged her deeper into something she could no longer escape. Inside the lighthouse, the air was colder than before, and the spiral staircase seemed to stretch endlessly. Mia climbed cautiously, her lantern casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. As she reached the top, the glow of the light was no longer warm, it was cold and menacing, pulsating like a heartbeat. Mia's mind raced. She asked how she could fix her mistake, but the keeper only shook his head. "There is no fixing it," he whispered, "but you can contain it if you have the courage to sacrifice yourself." His words hung in the air, heavy with finality, as the flickering light grew brighter, almost blinding. Before Mia could respond, the ground beneath her shook violently. The walls of the lighthouse seemed to ripple, and shadows began pouring out like water from a broken dam. They moved swiftly, forming shapes that twisted and writhed, their whispers turning into screams. The keeper disappeared into the chaos, leaving Mia alone. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. "You should not have come back." Mia turned to see a figure standing in the center of the room. It was the lighthouse keeper, his face pale and ghostly, his eyes filled with centuries of regret. "You think you freed the lighthouse," he said, "but you only freed me. And now, you must finish what you started." The keeper explained that the lighthouse was a doorway, a connection between the living world and the restless spirits of the sea. By breaking the curse, Mia had opened the doorway wider than ever before. "The shadows are no longer trapped here," he said, his voice trembling. "They are free to roam, and they will come for you." Desperate, she opened the journal, hoping for guidance. To her surprise, new words appeared on the blank pages. "The light is the key. Follow the light, and you may survive." Clutching the journal, Mia ran down the stairs, the shadows chasing her, their cold presence closing in with every step. Mia reached the base of the lighthouse, where the old compass rested on the floor, its needle glowing faintly. Remembering the journal's words, she grabbed the compass and ran outside. The light from the top of the lighthouse suddenly shot down, illuminating the ground around her. The shadows recoiled, hissing as they shrank away from the light's touch. She held the compass high, its glow intensifying as it absorbed the light from the tower. The whispers grew louder, now pleading instead of threatening. "Release us," they cried, their voices filled with sorrow. Mia realized the light wasn't meant to destroy them, it was meant to guide them home. Mia stood at the edge of the cliff, holding the glowing compass. She pointed it towards the horizon, where the first rays of dawn broke through the darkness. The shadows gathered around her, their forms shifting into shapes of sailors, lost souls longing for peace. The light from the compass stretched out over the sea, creating a glowing path that the shadows began to follow. One by one, they disappeared into the light, their whispers fading into the gentle sound of waves. As the last shadow vanished, the lighthouse grew silent, its glow dimming until it was completely dark. Mia collapsed to her knees, exhausted but relieved. She had finally set the spirits free. Yet, as she walked away, she felt the weight of the compass in her pocket and knew the lighthouse had left her with one final secret. Back at her home, Mia couldn't stop staring at the compass. Its glow had faded, but the weight in her pocket felt heavier than ever. She placed it on her table and noticed faint symbols etched around its rim. They weren't like the ones in the lighthouse, these were older, more intricate. As she traced them with her finger, the compass needle jerked violently, pointing west toward the sea. The journal's blank pages started to fill with ink again, revealing a single sentence: "Your journey is not over." A wave of unease swept over her. What could this mean? Was there another curse? Or was she bound to the lighthouse forever? The compass continued to point west, its needle unwavering. Mia decided to follow it, despite her fear. Renting a small boat from the harbor, she set out at dawn. The ocean was calm, but the air felt thick with tension, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. After hours of sailing, a small island emerged from the mist, its jagged rocks rising like teeth. As she approached, she saw remnants of an old settlement, crumbling stone houses, and a long abandoned dock. The compass glowed faintly, urging her forward. Stepping onto the island, she felt a chill run down her spine. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint sound of waves lapping against the shore. The island felt alive with memories. As Mia explored, she heard faint voices like distant echoes. They spoke of betrayal and loss, of a lighthouse keeper who had promised safety but brought destruction instead. The compass grew warmer in her hand, guiding her to the center of the island where a massive stone altar stood. The altar was covered in the same symbols she had seen in the lighthouse, glowing faintly in the dim light. A journal, much older than the one she had found before, lay open on the altar. Its pages spoke of a ritual to bind the shadows forever, but warned that it required a willing soul to remain as the guardian of the light. Mia's heart sank as she realized what the journal was asking of her. The compass glowed brighter, and the voices grew louder, pleading for her to take the keeper's place. "You can end this," they whispered. "But you must stay." She looked around the island, now understanding its purpose. This was where the keeper had drawn his power, where he had trapped the souls of the lost. Tears filled her eyes as she thought of her life, her dreams, and the future she would have to give up. But deep down, she knew she couldn't let the shadows escape again. If she didn't act, the cycle would start over, and more lives would be lost. Taking a deep breath, Mia placed the compass on the altar. The symbols on the stone glowed fiercely, lighting up the entire island. The voices became a chorus, chanting in a language she didn't understand. As the light from the compass expanded, Mia felt a strange warmth envelop her. as though the island itself was pulling her in. The shadows appeared, swirling around the altar, but they no longer seemed menacing. They were calm, almost grateful, as they faded into the light one by one. The compass's glow dimmed, and the altar began to crack, its power dissipating into the air. Mia felt herself becoming part of the island, her body light as air, her soul bound to the place forever. Years passed. But the island remained hidden, its secrets buried beneath the waves. Sailors who passed by claimed to see a faint light glowing in the distance, guiding them safely through treacherous waters. No one knew where the light came from, but legends spoke of a brave girl who had sacrificed everything to protect the living from the shadows of the sea. Mia's story became a whispered tale, told by sailors to ward off fear. Though her body was gone, her spirit remained, watching over the lighthouse and ensuring that the curse would never rise again. And on stormy nights, when the wind howled and the waves crashed, her gentle whispers could still be heard, guiding lost souls to safety. The lighthouse had become a beacon of hope and mystery for passing sailors. They spoke of the light that never failed, even in the darkest storms. Many tried to reach the island, but every attempt ended with the same outcome: the sea would turn them back. It was as if the island itself didn't want to be disturbed. Among the sailors, there was a man named Liam, an adventurer who had heard the tale of the lighthouse. Intrigued, he decided to uncover its secrets. Ignoring warnings, he set sail with a determination that rivaled the strength of the tides. As he approached the island, the compass in his pocket began to glow faintly. Among the sailors, there was a man named Liam, an adventurer who had heard the tale of the lighthouse. Intrigued, he decided to uncover its secrets. Ignoring warnings, he set sail with a determination that rivaled the strength of the tides. As he approached the island, the compass in his pocket began to glow faintly. Stepping onto the island, he was greeted by an overwhelming silence. The ruins of the old settlement stood still, shrouded in mist. He could feel a presence watching him, yet he saw no one. The lighthouse towered in the distance, its light pulsing softly, as if alive. Something about it felt both inviting and forbidding. As Liam climbed toward the lighthouse, the whispers began. They were faint at first, like the rustle of leaves, but grew louder with each step. "Why have you come?" they asked, their tones a mix of curiosity and warning. He ignored them, determined to find the source of the legend. Inside the lighthouse, the air was cold and heavy. The spiral staircase seemed endless, and with every step the whispers grew clearer. They spoke of Mia, the girl who had sacrificed everything to protect the living. Liam felt a strange connection to her story, as if it was calling him for a purpose he couldn't yet understand. At the top of the lighthouse, the light was blinding. Liam shielded his eyes, but the whispers continued, now forming coherent words. "You carry her compass," a deep voice said. Startled, Liam turned to see a faint figure, a ghostly version of Mia. Her presence was both calming and commanding, her gaze filled with sorrow and strength. "You've come because the lighthouse called you," Mia said. "The balance is shifting again. The shadows are restless, and the seal is weakening. You must decide whether to walk away or take my place as the keeper." Her words struck him like thunder, and he realized the weight of what lay ahead. Before Liam could answer, the lighthouse shook violently. Shadows erupted from the walls, swirling around the light. Their whispers were no longer gentle, they were angry and desperate. "They're trying to escape," Mia said urgently. "If the light goes out, They'll be free to roam the world. Liam gripped the compass tightly, feeling its warmth spread through him. The shadows lunged toward him, but the light flared, holding them back. "You have the power to restore the seal," Mia said, her voice trembling. "But it will cost you everything. Choose now, before it's too late." Liam took a deep breath, his mind racing. He didn't want to lose his life, but he couldn't let the shadows escape. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. Mia nodded, her ghostly form fading as the light enveloped him. The compass in his hand glowed brighter than ever, merging with the lighthouse's beam. The shadows screamed as they were drawn back into the walls, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The lighthouse grew calm, its light steady once more. Liam felt his body becoming lighter, his soul intertwining with the tower. He was no longer himself, he was the new keeper, bound to the lighthouse and its eternal mission. As Liam adjusted to his new role, he felt a surge of knowledge and power flowing through him. The whispers quieted, and the lighthouse seemed to breathe with him, its light pulsing in sync with his heartbeat. He now understood the history of the lighthouse, the sacrifices it had demanded, and the endless battle to keep the shadows at bay. Though his body was gone, Liam's spirit roamed the tower, watching the seas and guiding lost souls. He felt no fear or regret, only a profound sense of purpose. But deep within the walls, faint echoes of the shadows lingered, waiting for their chance to rise again. One stormy night, a ship lost in the violent waves approached the island. Liam felt the distress of the sailors and focused all his energy on the light. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the treacherous rocks and guiding the ship to safety. As the crew reached calmer waters, they swore they saw a figure standing in the lighthouse window, watching over them. But the storm had awakened something else. Deep in the shadows, a faint growl echoed. Liam felt it too, a stirring of unrest. Though the light had protected the sailors, it had also drawn the attention of the lurking darkness, which now yearned to break free. Days turned into weeks, and the lighthouse remained steadfast. But the whispers returned, more insistent than before. "You cannot hold us forever," they hissed, their voices blending with the howling wind. Liam ignored them, focusing on his duty. Yet he couldn't deny the growing tension within the tower. One night, the whispers turned into screams. Shadows began to seep through the cracks in the walls, their dark tendrils curling toward the light. Liam summoned all his strength, his connection to the lighthouse growing stronger. The beam flared, forcing the shadows back, but he knew this was only the beginning. Searching the depths of his newfound knowledge, Liam discovered a long-lost ritual that could strengthen the seal. It required a rare alignment of the moon and stars, which was fast approaching. The ritual would demand immense power, but it was the only way to keep the shadows contained. As the night of the alignment drew near, Liam prepared the lighthouse. He focused the light, channeling its energy through the compass that still rested at the heart of the tower. The air crackled with tension, and the whispers grew louder, trying to distract him. "You will fail," they taunted, their words dripping with malice. On the night of the alignment, the storm returned, fiercer than ever. Waves crashed against the island, and the wind howled like a beast unleashed. The shadows surged, their forms swirling around the lighthouse, their whispers turning into deafening roars. Liam stood firm, his light unwavering. As the stars aligned, a beam of light shot from the compass, piercing the sky. The shadows shrieked, their forms disintegrating under its power. The lighthouse shook violently, but Liam held his ground, pouring all his energy into the ritual. One by one, the shadows were drawn back into the walls, their screams fading into silence. When the storm passed, the island was eerily quiet. The lighthouse stood taller than ever, its light burning brighter and steadier. The ritual had worked, the seal was stronger, and the shadows were locked away once more. Liam felt a sense of peace, knowing he had fulfilled his purpose. From that day on, the lighthouse became a legend among sailors. Its light never dimmed, guiding lost souls and protecting the seas. Though Liam's spirit remained bound to the tower, he found solace in his eternal role as the keeper. And in the whispers of the wind, his voice could be heard, a guardian watching over the world from his eternal post. Years passed, and the legend of the forgotten lighthouse grew. Sailors and travelers spoke in hushed tones of the mysterious keeper who had sacrificed everything to protect the island. The lighthouse remained a steadfast beacon, guiding ships safely through dangerous waters. And in every storm, the light seemed to shine brighter, stronger, as if to remind the world of its eternal purpose. But there were those who still sought the lighthouse for other reasons. Adventurers, treasure hunters, and seekers of forgotten knowledge all tried to uncover its secrets. Yet none of them could reach the island, for the seas themselves seemed to protect the lighthouse, as though it were a living force. In a quiet village nearby, there was a young girl named Eliza who had heard the stories of the lighthouse since childhood. Her grandmother had spoken of the keeper and the shadows, and Eliza was drawn to the mystery of it all. One night, she found herself standing at the edge of the cliffs, staring out at the distant light. The wind whispered her name, as if inviting her to come closer. Eliza's heart raced with a mixture of fear and excitement. She didn't know why, but she felt an undeniable connection to the lighthouse. Her eyes locked onto the light, and in that moment she saw something that made her blood run cold. She could see a faint figure standing at the top of the tower, watching her. It was Liam, or at least what was left of him, a shadow in the light. The next night, Eliza couldn't resist. She found herself walking toward the lighthouse, her feet carrying her over the rocky path. The wind howled louder, and the whispers of the shadows seemed to follow her, growing louder with every step. "Turn back," they urged. "You don't belong here," but Eliza was determined to understand the truth. As she reached the base of the lighthouse, she felt the same pull that Liam had felt so many years ago. The door creaked open before her, as though inviting her in. Inside, the air was thick with the weight of history, and the walls seemed to pulse with energy. Eliza could feel the presence of something ancient, something alive. She climbed the stairs, the whispers growing louder, but she pushed on. When Eliza reached the top of the lighthouse, she was met with the blinding light. And there, in the center of the beam, stood the figure of Liam, not fully a ghost, but not entirely human either. He looked at her with a mixture of sadness and understanding, as if he had been waiting for her. "You have the compass," Liam's voice echoed in her mind. "The light has called you, just as it once called me." Eliza looked down at the small, worn compass in her hand, a gift from her grandmother. It had always been a mystery to her, but now she understood. It was the key to the lighthouse. The bond between the keeper and the light. Liam's voice grew more urgent. "The shadows are stirring again. The seal weakens, and the lighthouse needs a new keeper. I have fulfilled my duty, but now it's your turn." Eliza's heart raced and fear gripped her. She didn't want to take on such a heavy burden. She was just a girl, and the responsibility felt too great. But as Liam's form began to fade, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The compass in her hand pulsed, and the light from the lighthouse grew brighter, filling her with strength. "It is your destiny," Liam whispered. "You are ready." The shadows roared in the distance, but Eliza didn't hesitate. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, accepting her place as the new keeper of the lighthouse. As the light of the lighthouse enveloped Eliza, she felt a transformation. She was no longer just a girl, she was the guardian of the light, bound to the tower for eternity. The shadows, sensing the new keeper, shrieked in fury, but Eliza's resolve was unshakable. She focused all her energy on the compass, channeling its power into the beam. The shadows writhed, but they could not escape. From that day forward, Eliza stood as the new keeper, watching over the lighthouse and the seas beyond. The whispers were now hers to control, guiding her with wisdom from those who had come before her. The light would never fade, and the shadows would never rise again. The legend of the forgotten lighthouse continued, and Eliza's story was now written into its eternal history. Eliza's life had changed completely. The island, the lighthouse, and the shadows were now her responsibility. Every night, she climbed to the top of the lighthouse and gazed out over the sea. The whispers in the wind guided her, teaching her the ancient ways of the lighthouse keeper. Yet with each passing day, she felt the weight of her duty grow heavier. The shadows had not returned, but Eliza knew they were always watching, always waiting. She couldn't let her guard down, for even the smallest crack in the seal could allow them to escape. As she stood by the light, she often thought of Liam and the sacrifices he had made. He had warned her about this life, one of endless vigilance. Yet there was comfort in knowing she was not alone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Eliza noticed something unusual. A small boat appeared on the shore, barely visible through the mist. It was empty, with no sign of its owner. Eliza's heart skipped a beat. No one had ventured to the lighthouse for years, not since the storm that had sealed the island away from the world. She watched as the boat drifted closer, pulled by the currents, until it gently washed up on the rocky shore. There was no sign of anyone aboard. As Eliza stepped down from the lighthouse to investigate, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The air grew thick with tension, and the familiar whispers of the shadows seemed to stir once more. Eliza examined the boat carefully, but there was nothing unusual about it, except for a small, weathered journal tucked beneath one of the seats. She opened it cautiously, and her eyes widened in shock as she read the first few words: "I am searching for the forgotten lighthouse." The handwriting was messy, frantic, and the ink smudged as though written in haste. The journal told the story of a man named Marcus, a sailor who had heard rumors of the lighthouse and its mysterious keeper. He was obsessed with finding it, convinced that the secrets of the shadows would lead him to untold riches. As Eliza read further, she felt a sense of dread creep over her. Marcus had written about strange dreams, whispers in the night, and an insatiable desire to reach the lighthouse no matter the cost. That night, as Eliza pondered the journal, the air around the lighthouse grew still. The winds had stopped, and the usual sounds of the sea were eerily silent. Suddenly, the shadows began to stir. They crept along the walls, their forms slithering like dark tendrils. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest as she rushed to the top of the tower, the compass in her hand pulsing with an ominous energy. The whispers had returned, louder than ever. "He is here," they hissed. "The one who seeks the truth." Eliza looked out into the darkness, her eyes scanning the shores. The The shadows had found a way in, and they were not alone. Marcus, it seemed, had come to the island, and his presence had awakened the darkness once more. With Marcus's arrival, the balance of the lighthouse was threatened. The shadows had grown stronger, feeding off his obsession and fear. Eliza knew that she had to stop him before he could release them fully. She could feel the power of the shadows growing with each passing moment, tugging at her, whispering lies and promises. Standing firm, Eliza raised the compass high above her head. The light from the lighthouse shone brighter than it ever had, cutting through the dark fog that surrounded the island. The shadows recoiled, but they were not defeated yet. Eliza could feel them reaching for her, trying to break her concentration. But she had learned from the keeper who came before her. She would not be swayed. As the light intensified, Eliza focused every ounce of her energy into the compass. She whispered the ancient words of the ritual, words passed down through generations of keepers. The shadows shrieked in fury, their forms twisting and writhing, but the light was unyielding. Slowly, one by one, the shadows began to dissipate, their forms evaporating into the night air. With a final burst of energy, the light blazed like a supernova, and the last of the shadows was gone. Eliza collapsed to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. The lighthouse had withstood the test, and the island was safe once more. She looked out at the sea, knowing that her duty as the keeper would never truly end. But for now, peace had returned to the forgotten lighthouse. Months passed, and the island seemed to return to its peaceful, isolated state. Eliza continued her role as the keeper of the forgotten lighthouse, and the whispers of the shadows had faded. But one evening, as Eliza stood at the edge of the lighthouse looking out over the calm sea, she noticed a figure standing on the cliffs in the distance. It was a man, cloaked in shadows, his face hidden beneath a hood. Eliza's heart raced as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The figure seemed to be watching her, unmoving, just beyond the reach of the light. The shadows in the air swirled around him, as if drawn to his presence. Eliza instinctively tightened her grip on the compass. Was this a new threat, or someone seeking the light for their own purposes? Eliza spent the following days in deep thought. The figure remained on the cliffs, always at a distance, never approaching the lighthouse. But every time Eliza looked out, he was there, watching her. It was as if he knew her every move, a silent observer waiting for something. The whispers had returned once again, but this time they spoke of him. He comes for the light, they whispered. The keeper's power must be his. Eliza's stomach twisted with unease. She had defeated the shadows once before, but this felt different. The power of the lighthouse was strong, but the figure on the cliffs seemed to possess a dark strength of his own. Determined to protect the lighthouse and its secrets, Eliza decided to confront the mysterious figure. Armed with the compass and her knowledge of the ancient rituals, she made her way toward the cliffs. The wind howled fiercely, and the shadows in the air seemed to follow her every step. As she neared the edge of the island, the figure turned to face her, his face still obscured by the darkness. "I've been waiting for you, Keeper," he said, his voice low and menacing. "The light you guard is not meant for you. It belongs to those who understand its true power." Eliza's grip on the compass tightened. She had heard these words before, from the shadows that had tried to escape. But now it was real, and the threat was standing before her. The man stepped forward, and the shadows around him seemed to grow thicker, swirling like a storm. Eliza could feel the dark energy radiating from him, and for a moment, She was filled with doubt. But then she remembered the duty that had been passed down to her, the same duty that had been entrusted to every keeper before her. Without hesitation, Eliza raised the compass high above her head, its light glowing brighter than ever before. "This light is not for you," she declared, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "It is for the protection of all, not for those who seek to control it." The figure smirked, and the shadows lunged at her, but the light from the compass blazed brighter, cutting through the darkness. The battle raged on, with the shadows attacking, but Eliza's resolve remained unbroken. The light was stronger than the darkness, and she would prove it. With a final burst of power, the light from the lighthouse and the compass combined, and the figure was engulfed in a blinding flash. The shadows screeched in agony as they were forced back, and the figure was consumed by the light, vanishing without a trace. As the blinding light from the lighthouse faded, Eliza stood alone on the cliffs, her heart racing. The figure had disappeared, and the shadows that had once been so powerful were now gone. The air was still, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Eliza felt a sense of peace. The battle was over. The lighthouse was safe, and so was the island. But as she looked down at her hands, still trembling from the confrontation, a thought lingered in her mind. Had she truly defeated the shadows, or had they simply retreated, waiting for another chance to strike? The whispers were silent now, but Eliza knew they would never fully leave her. They were a part of her, a part of the lighthouse, and they always would be. Her days turned into weeks, and Eliza tried to settle into her life once more. The lighthouse continued to shine brightly, guiding any lost ships that dared approach the island. Yet, despite the calm, the whispers slowly began to return. They were faint at first, like a soft murmur in the distance, but Eliza could hear them. The whispers spoke of a new threat, one even darker and more dangerous than the last. "The keeper's light will falter," they whispered, "and when it does, the shadows will rise again, stronger than before." Eliza's heart sank. She had defeated the figure on the cliffs, but the shadows had not been eradicated. They had simply retreated, waiting for her to weaken, for her light to fade. As the whispers grew louder, Eliza knew she could no longer ignore them. She had to find out what was truly happening. She searched through the lighthouse's archives, ancient books and scrolls that had been passed down through generations of keepers. The stories were old, the ink faded, but one page caught her attention. It was a warning: the shadows cannot be destroyed. They are the essence of the lighthouse, the reflection of the keeper's soul. As long as the light burns, the shadows will exist. To rid the world of them, the keeper must sacrifice the light. Eliza's hands trembled as she read the words. The truth was more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. The shadows were tied to her very existence, and to destroy them, she would have to destroy the light itself. Eliza sat alone in the darkened lighthouse, the weight of her discovery pressing heavily on her shoulders. She had always known her duty was to protect the light, but now she understood its true cost. If the shadows were to be vanquished, she would have to extinguish the very light she had sworn to protect. She thought of the people who depended on the lighthouse, the ships that sailed safely thanks to its glow. She thought of the generations of keepers who had given their lives to guard it. Could she truly destroy it all, just to rid the world of the shadows? Eliza's heart ached with the burden of the choice before her. The whispers became clearer now, almost as if they were speaking directly to Eliza. The choice is yours, they said. Choose the light, and the shadows will always return. Choose the shadows, and the light will fade forever. Torn between her duty and the growing darkness, Eliza stood at the edge of the lighthouse, staring out at the sea. The wind howled around her, carrying with it the voices of those who had come before her. They all faced this moment, the moment when they had to decide what was more important, the light or the shadows. With a deep breath, Eliza made her decision. She would not let the darkness consume the lighthouse. She would find a way to live with the shadows, to coexist with them, but she would not let them take the light. It was her legacy, her duty, and it was the one thing that could protect the world from the darkness. The next day, Eliza stood tall, the compass glowing brightly in her hand. She knew what she had to do. The shadows would never truly leave, but they would no longer control her. She would guard the light, not just for herself, but for all those who relied on it. With a firm resolve, she climbed to the top of the lighthouse and stared out into the horizon. The whispers had quieted, but she could still hear them, like a distant echo in her mind. The shadows would always be there, but Eliza had chosen to fight them, to protect the light, no matter the cost. And so, as the lighthouse continued to shine its beacon across the dark waters, Eliza knew that her journey had only just begun. The shadows would always be a part of her world, but she was its keeper now. And she would never let the light fade. As Eliza stood at the top of the lighthouse, the wind blowing fiercely around her, she felt a strange sense of unease. The whispers had stopped, but she could feel something in the air, a presence, something unseen but undeniably there. The shadows, though silent, seemed to be stirring once again, and Eliza knew that her decision had not brought the peace she had hoped for. The light of the lighthouse flickered, as though it too was uncertain about the path Eliza had chosen. Was she truly strong enough to protect it from the growing darkness? The whispers now seemed to carry an ominous warning: the balance is fragile. The light can only last so long. Darkness will find a way. Eliza's heart pounded as the weight of her choices grew heavier. Days passed, and the unease Eliza felt grew stronger. The island, once so quiet, had become a place of tension. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as though the land itself was holding its breath. The lighthouse continued to shine, but Eliza could sense that something was coming. The silence before the storm was deafening. She ventured to the cliffs again, hoping for some clarity, but all she found was a strange fog that had rolled in from the sea. It was unlike any fog she had ever seen, cold and swirling, with an unnatural darkness at its core. The whispers returned, louder this time. The storm is coming. The light will be tested, they said. Eliza turned and ran back to the lighthouse, her heart racing. Something was on the horizon, something more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Eliza spent that night in the lighthouse, unable to shake the feeling that the shadows were drawing closer. The fog had spread over the island, creeping up the cliffs and surrounding the lighthouse in an eerie embrace. As the hours passed, the shadows seemed to take on a life of their own, creeping along the walls, whispering in the corners of her mind. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the lighthouse. Eliza rushed down the staircase, her breath quickening. The light had gone out, the beam of the lighthouse extinguished by an unseen force. Panic surged through her. Without the light, the island would be lost to the shadows. She grabbed the compass, but it too felt strangely cold, its glow flickering like a dying ember. The fog outside thickened, and Eliza could hear footsteps approaching the lighthouse. They were slow, deliberate, as if the darkness itself was walking toward her. A shadowy figure emerged from the mist, its form shifting and changing as it moved. It was the same figure Eliza had seen long ago, the one who had tried to claim the light for itself. "You thought you could keep the light," the figure whispered, its voice like a chill wind. "But darkness always finds a way to reclaim what is its own." The shadows around him twisted and writhed, as if alive. Eliza's grip on the compass tightened. She would not let him take the light again. The shadowy figure approached, and the darkness grew heavier, filling the room with an oppressive weight. Eliza could feel the shadows closing in on her, threatening to consume everything in their path. But she could still feel the light deep within the compass, faint but alive. She had to hold on to it, no matter what. With trembling hands, she raised the compass once more, the last beacon of hope in a world consumed by darkness. The light began to glow brighter, pushing back against the shadows. But the figure laughed, his eyes glowing with a malevolent gleam. "Your light cannot save you. You are bound to the darkness forever." Eliza stood firm, her heart pounding in her chest, as the darkness swirled around her. She refused to give up. The light was not just a symbol, it was the very core of who she was. And as long as she lived, she would protect it. She focused all her energy on the compass, willing the light to grow stronger, to push back the shadows once and for all. The light flared brighter than ever before, its intensity forcing the figure to retreat. The shadows screeched in pain, unable to bear the light's power. With one final surge of strength, Eliza unleashed the full power of the compass, and the figure vanished into the darkness, his form dissolving like smoke in the wind. The lighthouse's light shone once again, brighter than ever before, and the fog began to dissipate, revealing the clear sky. The battle was over. The light had triumphed over the darkness, but Eliza knew that the shadows would always be there, lurking in the corners of the world. She had won, but the struggle would never truly end. Still, she was the keeper of the light, and as long as she stood watch, the world would remain safe. The island was still. The lighthouse shone brightly, its light cutting through the darkness that had once threatened to consume it. Eliza stood at the base, gazing out over the sea. The storm had passed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the island was at peace. The whispers had fallen silent, leaving only the sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs. But Eliza knew better than to think the battle was truly over. The shadows might have been banished for now, but they would return. The balance between light and dark was fragile, and she was the keeper who had to maintain it. The light was her responsibility, and she could not let it falter again. The weight of that duty rested heavily on her shoulders, but she had made her choice. She would protect the light at all costs. Days passed, and Eliza continued her duties at the lighthouse, guiding ships safely through the waters. The island remained peaceful, but the shadows still lingered in the back of her mind. She had defeated the figure, but it was only a temporary victory. The whispers had told her the truth: the darkness would never truly leave. It was a part of the lighthouse, a part of her. As she walked along the cliffs one evening, a sense of loneliness washed over her. She missed the days before the shadows, before the whispers, when she had simply been the keeper of the light. But now her life had become one of constant vigilance. She could never relax, never let her guard down. The shadows were always waiting for a chance to return. One night, as Eliza sat in the lighthouse, she noticed something strange. The light, once so steady and strong, began to flicker. At first, she thought it was just a mechanical issue, but when she checked the lamp, it was clear that nothing was wrong. The light was burning brightly, but there was something else, something intangible that was causing it to flicker. The whispers returned, faint but growing louder. The light cannot last forever, they warned. The keeper's strength is weakening. The shadows will rise again. Eliza's heart raced as she listened to the voices. She had to act quickly. The balance was tipping, and if she didn't restore it, the darkness would consume everything. Determined to find a solution, Eliza began to search through the ancient books and scrolls once more. She had to find a way to strengthen the light, to make it unshakable. But the more she read, the more she realized that there was no easy solution. The shadows were a force of nature, tied to the very foundation of the lighthouse. As the days passed, Eliza grew increasingly restless. She felt the shadows closing in on her, testing her resolve. The whispers grew louder, urging her to give in. The light will fail, they whispered. You cannot fight it forever, but Eliza refused to listen. She had faced the darkness before, and she would face it again. The light was her duty, and she would protect it, no matter the cost. One night, as Eliza scoured the old texts, she stumbled upon a forgotten ritual. It was a secret passed down through generations of keepers, a way to strengthen the light and banish the shadows for good. But there was a catch. The ritual required the keeper to make a great sacrifice. It was said that only by giving up a piece of their soul could the light be made truly unbreakable. Eliza was torn. The ritual was risky, and the sacrifice it required was immense. But the shadows were growing stronger, and she knew that without the ritual, the light would not survive. She had already lost so much: her peace, her sense of normalcy. Was she willing to lose herself too, just to protect the lighthouse? The decision weighed heavily on her heart. With a heavy heart, Eliza prepared for the ritual. The night was dark, and the wind howled outside the lighthouse as she stood in the center of the ancient chamber. She had gathered the ingredients, the candles, the symbols. Everything was in place. As she began the chant, the light in the lighthouse flickered, as if responding to her call. The shadows stirred, sensing the ritual, but Eliza pressed on. The whispers became louder, more insistent, but she ignored them. She had made her choice. She would protect the light, no matter what the cost. The ritual was long and difficult, and as Eliza completed the final incantation, she felt a sharp pain in her chest. It was as though a piece of her soul had been torn away. The light flared brighter, the shadows screaming in fury as they were pushed back. Eliza fell to her knees, exhausted but victorious. The darkness was gone for now, but Eliza knew that the balance had shifted. The light was stronger, but so was the darkness. And though she had paid a great price, the lighthouse was safe for the moment. Eliza woke the next morning, her body aching. But there was a sense of calm that hadn't been there before. The shadows that had once been so persistent seemed to be at bay, and the light in the lighthouse burned brighter than ever. She sat by the window, gazing out at the peaceful sea, wondering if the price she had paid had truly been worth it. Yet, a strange emptiness lingered inside her. The sacrifice she had made was not just physical, it was something deeper. Her connection to the lighthouse had grown stronger, but so had her distance from the world. She was no longer the same. The whispers had ceased, But there was a sense of finality in the silence, like the storm had passed. But something else was coming. She could feel it in her bones. The days that followed were filled with a strange peace. Eliza went about her duties with renewed energy, watching over the lighthouse as the ships sailed safely by. But despite the calm, a quiet sense of dread began to creep into her thoughts. Something was changing. She couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were only waiting for the right moment to return. One evening, as Eliza stood at the top of the lighthouse, she saw a figure approaching from the horizon, a dark silhouette against the fading light. Her heart skipped a beat. It was too far away to see clearly, but the shape was unmistakable. It was the same figure she had seen before, the one that had tried to steal the light. The darkness had returned. Eliza descended quickly from the lighthouse, her pulse quickening. She knew the figure had come for the light again, and she had no idea how to stop it this time. Her strength had been drained by the ritual, and she could feel the shadows closing in once more. The fog rolled in from the sea, thick and impenetrable, hiding the world beyond. The figure grew closer, its form shifting like smoke. "You cannot escape," it hissed, its voice cold and hollow. "The light was never yours to keep. It belongs to the darkness." Eliza's heart sank. She had hoped the light would be enough, but now she understood that the darkness would never be fully vanquished. It was a force that would always return, no matter how hard she fought. Eliza felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. The lighthouse had been her life, but now it felt like a prison. The shadows that once seemed so distant had become a part of her, and she could not escape them. The ritual had made the light stronger, but it had also made her more vulnerable. She had sacrificed a part of herself, and now the darkness was creeping back in, threatening to take over everything she had worked for. She thought back to the stories she had read in the old book stories of keepers who had lost themselves to the shadows. They had been strong, but even they had succumbed. Was she destined to follow the same path? Or could she find a way to break free from the cycle of light and darkness once and for all? The figure now stood at the base of the lighthouse, its form more solid than ever. Eliza watched from the window, unable to move. The light flickered in response, as though it too sensed the looming danger. "You cannot fight what is inevitable," the figure said, its voice like ice. "The shadows will take what is theirs." Eliza's heart raced. She could not allow the darkness to win again. But what was the price of victory? The whispers had told her that the shadows were a part of the lighthouse's soul, a force that could never be completely destroyed. She had sacrificed so much to protect the light, but she was starting to wonder if there was a cost too high to pay. Could she keep going, or would the shadows eventually consume her as they had consumed others before her? With trembling hands, Eliza stood up, ready to face the figure once more. She had already given so much, but she knew she couldn't give up. The light had to survive. It was her purpose, her destiny. As she walked down the staircase and approached the door, she made a final decision. The figure stood in the fog, waiting. "Are you ready to sacrifice everything?" it asked, its voice mocking. Eliza raised the compass once more, feeling its power surge within her. "I am ready," she whispered. The light in the lighthouse flared with a brilliant intensity, casting shadows that seemed to writhe in pain. Eliza stepped into the light, embracing it fully, ready to face whatever came next. The darkness would not take her down without a fight. With trembling hands, Eliza stood up, ready to face the figure once more. She had already given so much, but she knew she couldn't give up. The light had to survive. It was her purpose, her destiny. As she walked down the staircase and approached the door, she made a final decision. The figure stood in the fog, waiting. "Are you ready to sacrifice everything?" it asked, its voice mocking. Eliza raised the compass once more, feeling its power surge within her. "I am ready," she whispered. The light in the lighthouse flared with a brilliant intensity, casting shadows that seemed to writhe in pain. Eliza stepped into the light, embracing it fully, ready to face whatever came next. The darkness would not take her down without a fight. The fog thickened around the lighthouse as Eliza approached the figure. The air was cold, heavy with the weight of the past and the fear of the unknown. She could feel the shadows stirring, trying to twist around her, pulling at her resolve. The figure stepped forward, its form now fully solid, eyes glowing with malice. "You think you can defeat me," it sneered. "You have already given so much. You are nothing but a shadow yourself now, bound to this place." Eliza stood tall, gripping the compass tightly. "I am the keeper of the light," she said, her voice steady. "And I will not let you win with that." The light from the lighthouse surged forward, pushing back the darkness that had once seemed all-consuming. As the light clashed with the shadows, Eliza felt the power of the lighthouse flowing through her. She had never felt such strength before. The ancient energy that had been passed down through generations of keepers seemed to merge with her own. The figure screamed in fury, but it was powerless against the light. The shadows began to dissolve, fading into the fog as if they had never existed. But Eliza knew better. The darkness might be gone for now, but it was always lurking, waiting to return. She could not let her guard down. The lighthouse was not just a beacon for ships, it was a barrier between the world of light and the realm of shadows. And she was its guardian. When the battle finally ended, the fog began to lift, and the lighthouse stood once more in the calm. Eliza felt the weight of her victory, but also the heaviness of her sacrifice. She had given a part of herself to protect the light, and though the shadows were gone, she felt more alone than ever. The lighthouse was her home, but now it felt like a cage. She wandered the halls, feeling the echoes of the past. The walls seemed to whisper to her, not with malice, but with longing. She had fulfilled her duty, but at what cost? Could she ever find peace again, or was she forever bound to this place, watching over the light, knowing that the shadows would always return? Days passed in a peaceful silence, but Eliza couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. The lighthouse was a place of refuge for ships lost in the storm, but for Eliza, it had become a prison. She had given up so much of herself to protect the light, and now, all she had was the endless stretch of the sea and the flickering flame. One evening, as she sat by the window, she saw a ship approaching in the distance. It was a small, solitary vessel, navigating through the calm waters. For a moment, Eliza thought about what her life might have been like if she hadn't become the keeper of the lighthouse. Would she have been able to sail away, to find a life of freedom? Or was she always destined to be here, bound to the light and the shadows? As the ship passed, Eliza's mind wandered back to the whispers. They had been silent for a long time, but now she could hear them faintly, like a distant echo. "You are never free," they whispered, barely audible, but unmistakable. "The light will always need you." "The shadows will always return," Eliza shivered, her hand tightening around the railing. The shadows might have been gone, but their presence lingered, always on the edge of her consciousness. She had fought so hard to protect the light, But now she realized something even more troubling. The true battle was not against the shadows outside, but the ones within herself. The days grew colder, and Eliza stood at the top of the lighthouse, watching the horizon as the sun dipped below the waves. The whispers had faded, but the feeling of dread remained. She knew the darkness would come again, just as the light would never falter. It was a cycle that could not be broken. And so, Eliza continued her watch. The lighthouse, the lighthouse, the light and the shadows, it was all part of the same unbroken circle. She was the keeper, and she would stand guard for as long as she could, knowing that the peace she had fought for was always temporary. The shadows would always return, and the light would always shine to meet them. It was her duty, her curse, and her fate. Time seemed to stretch endlessly within the walls of the lighthouse. Each day, the light flickered steadily, casting long shadows across the floors. Eliza had become part of the lighthouse itself, its pulse resonating within her. Yet, as the seasons changed, she noticed the signs of wear on herself, her hair graying slightly, her hands rough with the years of service. There were moments when she wondered how much longer she could continue. She had become the lighthouse, and the lighthouse had become her. There were no more visitors, no more ships in distress, just the steady, rhythmic dance of light and shadow. It was a lonely existence, but it was all she knew. The whispers had quieted, but the weight of time still pressed upon her shoulders. One evening, as the sun set behind the clouds, Eliza noticed something strange. The light, once steady and unyielding, began to flicker. It was subtle at first, a slight pulse of dimness, but it grew stronger with each passing hour. Eliza rushed to the lantern room, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what this meant. The shadows were returning. The lighthouse had always stood as a beacon, strong and unwavering. But now it seemed to be struggling. The light flickered again, almost as if it were fighting against the darkness. Eliza felt a chill run down her spine. Could it be that the light was failing her, failing the world? Was the darkness finally claiming what it had lost all those years ago? By midnight, the flickering light had become more pronounced. Shadows began creeping along the walls, twisting and writhing as if they had a life of their own. Eliza stood in the lantern room, unable to tear her eyes away from the growing darkness. She had fought so long to keep the shadows at bay, but now it seemed they had returned, stronger than before. The wind howled outside, and the fog rolled in thick and fast. The lighthouse's light dimmed further, and Eliza could see the figure once again emerging from the fog, its form darker than ever. "You thought you could stop me," the figure whispered, its voice cold and threatening. But the shadows never truly leave. They are part of you, part of this place. Eliza's heart raced. The shadows had grown too strong, and she felt herself weakening. The compass, once a source of hope, now felt heavy in her hand, as though it too were drained of its power. The figure advanced, its form becoming more solid with each step. "The light is mine now," it hissed. "And you. You are nothing but a part of the darkness." Eliza trembled, knowing that the light could no longer protect her. She had given so much to keep the shadows at bay, but now she realized that the cycle could not be broken. The lighthouse had always been a bridge between the light and the darkness, and she was the keeper who could never leave. She had been bound to this place, to the light, and to the shadows forever. With the figure closing in on her, Eliza made a desperate decision. She had always believed that the light could protect her, that it could keep the darkness away. But now, She saw the truth the light alone was not enough. It had never been about the light or the darkness, it had always been about the balance between the two. In that moment, Eliza knew what she had to do. She couldn't defeat the shadows, she could only coexist with them. She reached for the lantern, her fingers trembling. The light flickered one last time, and for the first time in years, the shadows withdrew. Eliza, exhausted and broken, collapsed to the ground, knowing that she had made her choice. The light and darkness would live together, as they always had. The next morning, the lighthouse stood in eerie silence. The light was no longer flickering, but it didn't shine as brightly as it once had. The shadows still lingered at the edges, not gone, but no longer overpowering. Eliza rose slowly, feeling the weight of her decision. The fog had cleared, and the sea was calm once more. Though the darkness was still there, it was no longer an enemy. It was part of her now, just as the light was. She had accepted that both would always be present, and she was no longer afraid. The whispers had stopped, and Eliza could finally breathe. The battle had been long and hard, but in the end, she had found a way to live with the shadows. The lighthouse would continue to stand, its light steady, a symbol of balance between light and darkness. The days passed, and Eliza settled into a new routine. The lighthouse still stood strong, its light a steady presence in the dark night. The shadows no longer threatened her in the same way, but they were always there, lingering in the background, a reminder of the balance she had chosen. Eliza no longer feared them. She had learned to accept their presence, just as she had accepted her role as the keeper. She spent her days walking along the cliffside, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. There were no more ships to guide, no more storms to calm. The lighthouse had become a silent guardian of the sea, and Eliza had become its quiet, watchful soul. It was not the life she had once imagined, but it was her life now, and for the first time in years she felt at peace. One evening, as Eliza sat on the steps of the lighthouse, she noticed a figure approaching in the distance. The figure was shrouded in the mist, walking slowly toward her, its movements deliberate and steady. Eliza's heart skipped a beat. Was it the same figure that had once tormented her? Or was it someone new? The figure drew closer, and Eliza could make out a familiar face. It was a man, his features weathered by time, his eyes tired but kind. "I've come to see you," he said, his voice calm and deep. Eliza stood up, her heart racing. "Who are you?" she asked. "I'm the keeper of the lighthouse," he replied softly. "But you are not alone anymore. The balance has been restored." With the figure closing in on her, Eliza made a desperate decision. She had always believed that the light could protect her, that it could keep the darkness away. But now, she saw the truth: the light alone was not enough. It had never been about the light or the darkness, it had always been about the balance between the two. In that moment, Eliza knew what she had to do. She couldn't defeat the shadows, she could only coexist with them. She reached for the lantern, her fingers trembling. The light flickered one last time, and for the first time in years, the shadows withdrew. Eliza, exhausted and broken, collapsed to the ground, knowing that she had made her choice. The light and darkness would live together, as they always had. The next night, as Eliza and Samuel stood together on the cliffs, a strange fog began to roll in from the sea. The air grew thick and cold, and the lighthouse light flickered once more. Eliza's heart sank. She had thought the fog was gone for good, but now it was back, more oppressive than ever. The shadows, which had seemed dormant, were beginning to stir once again. Samuel's eyes narrowed, sensing the return of the darkness. "It's coming," he said, his voice low. "The balance is shifting again. You must be ready." Eliza nodded, gripping the compass tightly. She knew what she had to do. The lighthouse was not just a beacon, it was a battleground, a place where the forces of light and shadow collided. And once again, she was called to stand in its defense. As the fog thickened, Eliza and Samuel rushed to the lantern room. The shadows began to twist around the lighthouse, creeping along the walls like dark tendrils reaching for the light. Eliza could feel the pressure building, a weight in the air that seemed to suffocate the very life around her. The compass began to glow faintly in her hand, as if it knew the battle was about to begin once more. The figure appeared again, stepping from the fog. But this time it was not alone. There were other shadows, dark shapes that seemed to be formed from the very fog itself. Eliza's heart raced. She had thought she had won, but now it seemed the darkness was stronger than ever. Samuel stood by her side, his face grim. "We cannot fight them alone," he said. "The light needs to be stronger together." They reached for the lantern, hoping their combined strength would be enough to keep the shadows at bay. The light from the lantern flared brightly as Eliza and Samuel channeled all their energy into it. The shadows screamed in fury, but they could not get closer. The power of the light pushed them back, forcing them to retreat into the fog. Eliza could feel the tension, the fight draining her strength. She knew this battle could be the final one, the one that would either end the darkness for good or consume them all. With a final surge of energy, the light grew blindingly bright, and the shadows scattered, vanishing into the night. The fog began to lift, the air clearing as if a storm had passed. Eliza and Samuel stood, exhausted but victorious. The lighthouse was safe once again. But Eliza knew, deep in her heart, that the darkness would always return. And so, she would continue to stand guard, protecting the light that kept the shadows at bay. The dawn broke quietly over the sea, casting a soft glow across the lighthouse. The fog had finally lifted, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the air seemed fresh and free of the oppressive weight it once carried. Eliza and Samuel stood in silence, watching as the first rays of sunlight touched the rocks below. Eliza's heart still raced, the memory of the shadows and the battle they had fought fresh in her mind. Yet there was a new peace, a quiet acceptance that came with the dawn. She realized that the darkness would always return, but she would be ready. The lighthouse was not just a structure, it was a symbol, a beacon of resilience in the face of the unknown. That afternoon, Samuel sat with Eliza, his eyes far away, as if lost in a memory. "When I was the keeper," he began, "I never understood the true purpose of the lighthouse. I thought it was just about keeping the light burning, guiding ships safely to shore." He paused, his voice softening. "But it's more than that. The lighthouse is a bridge between worlds, between light and dark, between the known and the unknown." Eliza listened, her thoughts drifting to the shadows that had plagued her. She had come to understand that the lighthouse wasn't just a place of safety, it was a place of balance. The light and dark could never truly be separated. They were two sides of the same coin, each necessary for the other. And she, the keeper, was the one who had to ensure that balance was maintained. Eliza found herself reflecting on Samuel's words long after he had left the lighthouse. She had always thought that her role was to fight the darkness, to keep it away from the light. But now, she understood the truth. Her job was to maintain the balance between them. The shadows were never truly gone. They were a part of her, a part of the lighthouse. And in accepting them, she had found the strength to protect the light. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Eliza stood on the cliffs, staring out at the sea. She felt a sense of calm wash over her, knowing that the battle was not over, but that she was no longer afraid. She had made her choice. She would continue to be the keeper, not just of the light, but of the shadows as well. In the days that followed, Eliza grew more accustomed to her role as the keeper of the lighthouse. The shadows, once a source of fear and darkness, had become her companions. They no longer whispered in terror, but in quiet understanding. The lighthouse had become a place of peace, a place where light and dark could coexist in harmony. One evening, as Eliza climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room, she paused and looked at the light. It burned steady and bright, just as it always had. But now it felt different. It no longer felt like a tool to ward off darkness. It felt like a reflection of herself, a light that shone despite the shadows that surrounded it. She smiled softly. She had learned to embrace both the light and the dark, and in doing so, had found the strength she needed to keep the lighthouse burning. The years passed, and Eliza grew older. The lighthouse had become her home, her sanctuary. But she knew that the time would come when she could no longer tend to its light. The shadows had grown quieter, the whispers fading into the distance. It was a sign that her time as the keeper was nearing its end. One evening, as the sun set behind the horizon, Eliza turned to the lighthouse. She had prepared the light one last time, ensuring that it would shine brightly for the one who would take her place. "I have kept the balance," she whispered. "Now it's time for the next keeper to take over," and with that, she left the lighthouse, her heart filled with peace, knowing that it would always stand, a beacon for those who needed it. The new keeper arrived the following day, a young woman named Lily, eager to take on the mantle that Eliza had left behind. Eliza had prepared her well, teaching her the ways of the lighthouse and the delicate balance between light and dark. Lily's first night as the keeper was filled with awe and wonder as she stood in the lantern room, watching the light shine brightly against the vast, dark sea. As the years passed, Lily learned the true meaning of being a keeper. She, too, would face the shadows and the whispers, but like Eliza before her, she would understand that the light and the darkness must always coexist. The lighthouse would continue to stand, its light unwavering, a beacon for those who sought guidance, no matter the darkness that surrounded them. As the years passed, Lily grew into her role as the new keeper of the lighthouse. The shadows no longer whispered in terror, but rather in quiet respect, as if acknowledging the balance she had maintained. The light continued to shine brightly, its steady glow reaching out over the sea, guiding any who ventured too far into the unknown. But something new began to stir within the lighthouse. One evening, Lily noticed a figure standing at the edge of the cliffs, staring out over the water. It was Eliza, older now, but her presence still strong and dignified. Lily felt a strange pull, as if the old keeper had returned for one final visit. Eliza turned to her and smiled. "The lighthouse is in good hands," she said softly. "But never forget, the shadows will always return," Lily nodded, understanding the weight of those words. The balance would always need a keeper, someone to watch, someone to protect. Eliza stayed for several days, sharing stories of her time as the keeper. She told Lily about the battles, the whispers of the shadows, and the peaceful moments that came after the storm had passed. She spoke of the balance she had learned to maintain between light and dark, and how the lighthouse had come to symbolize that delicate harmony. The light is not just a guide, Eliza explained. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is hope. Even when the shadows seem overwhelming, the light is always there, waiting for you to embrace it. Lily listened closely, taking in every word. She knew that her role was more than just tending to the light, it was about protecting the hope it symbolized. As Eliza prepared to leave, she gave Lily one last piece of advice. Remember, the lighthouse is not just for you, it's for everyone. Be the light for others, just as it has been for you. With that, Eliza vanished into the distance, leaving Lily with a newfound sense of purpose. It wasn't long after Eliza's departure that Lily felt a familiar chill in the air. The fog returned, rolling in from the sea, thick and suffocating. The whispers of the shadows seemed to grow louder, and Lily knew that the time had come to face the darkness once again. The light in the lighthouse flickered, responding to the growing tension in the air. Lily rushed to the lantern room, her heart pounding in her chest. As she gazed out over the water, the fog parted and a shadowy figure appeared, standing on the cliffs just beyond the reach of the lighthouse's light. It was not one of the old shadows, but something new, something darker. Lily's breath caught in her throat as she realized that the battle was not over. The darkness had returned, stronger than before, and it was up to her to keep the balance once again. The shadow loomed before her, but instead of retreating in fear, Lily stood tall, her eyes locked on the figure. The darkness seemed to pulse with a life of its own, swirling around her, but she did not falter. She had learned that the darkness was not her enemy, it was a part of the lighthouse, a part of the balance she had sworn to protect. The shadow moved closer, and Lily reached out, placing her hand on its cold, shifting surface. Instead of pulling away, she allowed herself to feel the darkness, to understand it. It whispered in her ear, not with malice, but with a quiet understanding. For the first time, Lily felt at peace with the shadows. She knew that they would never be fully gone, but she also knew that they would never overwhelm the light. The balance had been restored once again. As the night passed, the fog lifted, and the lighthouse light shone brightly once more, casting its beam over the sea. The shadows had retreated, but Lily knew they would return. The balance was not something that could be easily kept, it was a constant cycle, a never-ending dance between light and dark. But Lily had learned to embrace both sides, and in doing so, she had found a strength she never knew she had. The lighthouse had stood for centuries, its light a beacon for those who needed guidance. And now, it would continue to shine, not just as a guide, but as a symbol of hope. Lily stood in the lantern room, gazing out at the vast, dark ocean. The winds whispered in the distance, but Lily no longer feared them. She was the keeper now, and she knew that no matter how many shadows came, the light would always remain. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting its golden light across the sea. Lily stood at the edge of the cliffs, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. The lighthouse behind her stood tall and proud, its light still glowing brightly, though the night had passed. She could feel the peacefulness of the morning, a stark contrast to the turmoil of the night before. The shadows had retreated for now, but Lily knew that they would always be a part of her life. In the quiet of the morning, she could hear the soft whispers of the wind. They no longer sounded threatening, but rather like a reminder life was about balance, and she was the one to keep it. She felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that she was carrying on the legacy of those who had come before her. As the sun rose higher, Lily knew her journey as the keeper of the lighthouse was far from over. The light would always guide her, and she would continue to embrace both the light and the darkness. Days turned into weeks, and Lily settled into her new life as the keeper of the lighthouse. The shadows no longer seemed as threatening as they once had. She had learned to live with them, understanding that they were a part of the world, just like the light. The townspeople spoke of the lighthouse with reverence, knowing that it had stood for generations, guiding lost sailors and travelers alike. One evening, as Lily walked along the beach, she encountered an old fisherman. He smiled at her, his weathered face full of wisdom. "You've done well, keeper," he said. "The shadows are quieter now. The balance is shifting back to where it belongs." Lily nodded, grateful for his words. As the fisherman walked away, Lily stood there, feeling a deep sense of responsibility. She had promised to protect the lighthouse, and in doing so, she had made a promise to herself to never lose sight of the balance between light and dark. One stormy night, as the wind howled and the rain pelted the windows of the lighthouse, Lily heard a knock at the door. She hesitated, unsure if she was imagining things. The storm made everything seem more intense, more alive. When she opened the door, no one was there. But standing on the doorstep was a small, faded lantern, its flame flickering in the wind. Lily picked it up carefully, wondering who had left it there. As she examined the lantern, she felt a strange chill. The light inside it seemed to glow with an eerie brightness, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls of the lighthouse. She felt a sudden presence behind her. When she turned, she saw the figure of a woman, tall and gaunt, her face pale and hollow. The woman smiled, though it was not a warm smile. "The shadows are always with you," she whispered. And then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished into the darkness. Lily stood frozen in place, the lantern still clutched in her hands. The storm outside raged on, but the air inside the lighthouse had grown strangely still. The woman's words echoed in her mind, and for the first time since she had taken on the role of keeper, Lily felt a sense of unease. The shadows, she realized, were not just a force of nature, they were a reminder that there was always something lurking just beyond the edge of the light. For the next few days, Lily found herself more vigilant than ever. She kept the lantern close, its flickering light offering some comfort in the midst of her growing anxiety. The lighthouse seemed to hum with energy, as if aware of the unsettling presence that had visited her. But no matter how much she searched, she could find no trace of the ghostly woman. The shadows seemed to grow darker, more unpredictable. Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Weeks passed without another visit from the ghostly figure, but the unease lingered. Lily continued her duties, tending to the lighthouse and watching the horizon, but her nights were restless. She often found herself waking in the middle of the night, feeling as if someone were standing beside her. She would look around, but there would be no one there. The silence would return, but it was a silence filled with tension. One night, as she sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the sea, Lily noticed something strange. The shadows near the cliffs seemed to be moving, shifting in a way that she hadn't seen before. It was as if they were alive, reacting to something. Her heart raced, and she knew that whatever had been lurking in the darkness was returning. The storm had passed, but a new kind of storm was on the horizon, one that would test her in ways she couldn't yet understand. The next morning, the sky was overcast. the air heavy with the promise of something coming. Lily stood at the top of the lighthouse, staring out into the misty distance. The sea was choppy, the waves crashing violently against the rocks below. She could feel the tension in the air, as if something was building up, waiting to be unleashed. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance at first. It was just a shadow, but as it grew closer, Lily could see the outline of a tall, dark figure standing on the cliffs. The shadow was no longer a mere whisper. It was something more. Lily's heart skipped a beat as she realized the truth. The shadow was coming back, stronger than ever. It had not been defeated, it had only been waiting. And now, it was ready to return to the lighthouse, to challenge the keeper and her light once again. Lily stood frozen, her gaze locked on the shadowy figure in the distance. The wind howled around her, and the air seemed thick with an eerie presence. As the figure moved closer, the shadows it cast twisted and writhed, as though alive. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment she questioned if she was ready for whatever was coming. The figure's outline became clearer, revealing a tall, thin silhouette, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Lily took a step back, the wind almost pushing her toward the stairs. The lighthouse seemed to groan, as if warning her of the danger that was drawing near. She couldn't turn away. The figure was not just a shadow, it was the manifestation of the darkness that had plagued the lighthouse for so long. As it reached the base of the lighthouse, Lily whispered under her breath, "What do you want?" Her voice barely carried over the howling wind, but she hoped it would reach the shadow's ears. The figure remained silent, its eyes never leaving Lily's. There was something almost familiar about the shape, as though she had seen it before, but she couldn't place where. The figure stepped forward, its presence darkening the air around it. Lily's pulse quickened. She knew she had to confront it, but fear held her in place. It was as if the shadows themselves were closing in around her, making every movement feel like a battle against her own body. Then, the figure spoke not with words, but with whispers, soft and haunting. The whispers weren't just in her ears, they felt like they were inside her mind, crawling through her thoughts. "You cannot escape the whispers," seemed to say. "The shadows belong to you now." Lily gripped the railing of the lighthouse, her knuckles turning white. She had always feared the shadows, but now they were speaking to her. And somehow she knew they weren't lying. Lily's mind raced as the shadows seemed to press closer. She wanted to run, to flee back into the safety of the lighthouse, but the figure's presence held her captive. The whispers continued, growing louder, more insistent. They spoke of an ancient bond, a connection between the keeper and the darkness that would never truly break. Lily had always known that the lighthouse was no ordinary place, but hearing these words made her realize the truth. She was bound to the shadows, just as much as she was bound to the light. Her hand trembled as she reached for the lantern she had kept close. It flickered softly in the dark, offering a faint glimmer of hope. She raised it high, and the shadows recoiled, as though they were afraid of the light. For a brief moment, Lily felt a surge of power, the light in her hand pushing the darkness away. But the shadows only seemed to grow stronger, more determined to swallow the light whole. The battle was far from over, and Lily knew she would have to face the darkness head-on. With the lantern in her grasp, Lily faced the shadowy figure, her mind racing for a plan. The whispers surrounded her, pressing against her ears, trying to drown out her thoughts. She could feel the weight of the responsibility bearing down on her. She was the keeper of the lighthouse, but she was also the keeper of the shadows. There was no escaping it. She had to choose: would she fight the darkness or learn to live with it? Lily took a deep breath, her gaze never wavering from the figure in front of her. She could feel the energy in the air, the tension building. The shadow was waiting for her decision, its presence looming like a storm ready to break. She had spent so long running from the darkness, hiding in the light. But now she realized that it was not the shadow she needed to fear, it was the imbalance, the refusal to accept the darkness as part of her life. She had to find a way to live with both the light and the shadow, or else she would be consumed by them. As Lily stood there, her heart beating in time with the crashing waves below, a sense of calm washed over her. She had made her choice. With one final glance at the shadowy figure, she raised the lantern high, its light cutting through the darkness like a blade. The shadows recoiled, their whispers fading into the wind. The figure did not retreat, but neither did it advance. It simply stood there, watching her with those glowing eyes. Lily understood. Now the shadow was not her enemy. It was a part of her, a part of the lighthouse, a part of the balance. The winds died down, and the storm passed. The lighthouse, once again, stood in peaceful silence. But Lily knew that peace would not last forever. The shadows would return, as they always did, and she would be ready for them. She was no longer just a keeper of the light. She was the keeper of the balance, a guardian of both the light and the shadow. Years passed, and the lighthouse remained a symbol of hope for the sailors and travelers who passed by. Lily continued her role as the keeper, watching over the lighthouse and the shadows it held. The balance between light and dark was never perfect, but it was hers to maintain. She had learned to live with the whispers, to listen for their warnings, but never to fear them. The shadows had become a part of her, just as the light had. One stormy night, as Lily stood on the cliffs, watching the waves crash against the rocks below, she smiled to herself. She knew the shadows would always be there, but she was no longer afraid of them. The lighthouse would always stand, its light shining brightly, guiding those who were lost. And as for Lily, she had become more than a keeper. She had become a protector, not just of the lighthouse, but of the balance that kept the world turning. Years had passed since Lily first took her place as the keeper of the lighthouse. The winds had been calm, and the waves had crashed gently against the cliffs. But one evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, a storm began to form in the distance. The clouds darkened, swirling ominously above the sea. Lily felt a chill run down her spine. She knew, deep down, that the storm was not just a natural occurrence, it was a sign. The shadows began to stir, their whispers growing louder. This storm wasn't just a test of the lighthouse, it was a test of Lily herself. The balance she had fought so hard to maintain was about to be challenged. The wind howled, and the sky seemed to crack open with thunder. Lily steadied herself, knowing the time had come to face the shadows once more. The storm wasn't just on the outside, it was brewing inside her as well. As the storm raged, Lily stood at the top of the lighthouse, her lantern casting long shadows across the walls. The whispers of the shadows were growing louder, their voices a chaotic blend of fear and anger. She could feel the pressure building, the darkness clawing at her from every corner. The balance she had worked so hard to preserve was slipping away. The shadows were gathering, growing stronger with every passing moment. Lily's heart raced, but she remained steady. The whispers called her name, begging her to join them, to embrace the darkness and let go of the light. The wind screamed through the cracks in the lighthouse, but Lily knew better than to give in. She had made a promise to herself and to the lighthouse that she would never surrender to the shadows. But this time, it wasn't just about resisting the darkness, it was about understanding it, accepting it as part of the whole. Lily's mind swirled with doubt. The whispers were no longer just voices in the wind, they were thoughts, pulling at the very core of her being. The storm outside seemed to echo the turmoil inside her. She had always fought to keep the balance, but now it felt like the balance itself was falling apart. Was the light enough to keep the shadows at bay? Or was there something deeper, something hidden in the dark that she needed to confront? Her lantern flickered, casting brief flashes of light in the growing darkness. Lily's grip tightened around the metal handle as she tried to calm her racing thoughts. She had never questioned her role as the keeper before, but now it felt like the very essence of the lighthouse was at stake. The shadows wanted her to become one with them, to let go of everything she had worked for. But Lily knew she couldn't. Not now. Not when so many lives depended on the light. Just as Lily felt the weight of the storm bear down on her, a new voice emerged from the shadows. It was soft at first, barely a whisper, but it grew stronger with each passing second. The voice was different from the usual whispers. This voice was calm, almost soothing. It spoke to Lily in a way she couldn't ignore. "Lily, you are not alone," the voice said, its tone gentle yet filled with an ancient power. "The shadows you fear are not your enemy. They are the guardians of balance, just as you are. To keep the light, you must understand the darkness." Lily's eyes widened as the words sank in. She had spent so long running from the shadows, trying to keep them at bay. But what if the shadows weren't something to fear? What if they were a part of the larger cycle of life, like the light itself? The storm outside seemed to slow for a moment, as if waiting for Lily's next move. The mysterious voice continued, urging her to listen, to understand. "You have always held the lantern high, fighting against the darkness. But to truly protect the lighthouse, you must embrace both the light and the dark. Only then will you have the power to maintain the balance." Lily stood still, her mind whirling with these new revelations. Could she really accept the darkness within her? Could she find a way to coexist with the very thing she had spent her life avoiding? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the shadows were not separate from her, they were part of her, a reflection of the fear and doubts that lingered in her heart. The light would always shine, but the darkness had its place too. With newfound clarity, Lily faced the storm, her heart calm and steady. The shadows no longer whispered with anger or fear. Instead, they were silent, waiting for her to make her choice. She knew what she had to do. The lighthouse, the shadows, the light, they were all part of a larger story, and she was the keeper of that story. To protect the lighthouse, she had to protect the balance, not just between light and dark, but within herself. She raised her lantern high, its glow casting long shadows on the ground. The shadows danced, swirling around the lighthouse, but this time, Lily did not retreat. Instead, she stood tall, letting the light and the dark flow through her, accepting them both. The storm raged outside, but the lighthouse stood strong, its beacon shining bright against the night. As the storm slowly faded into the distance, the lighthouse stood unwavering. The wind died down, and the whispers of the shadows faded into a peaceful silence. The balance had been restored, not just in the world around Lily, but within herself. She had embraced the darkness, not as an enemy, but as a part of the whole. The light and the dark were no longer opposing forces, they were two sides of the same coin. And as the keeper of the lighthouse, it was Lily's duty to protect both. The air was still, and the sea once again crashed gently against the cliffs. Lily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the night's events settle in her chest. She knew the shadows would return, but now she was ready for them. She had learned that true strength came from embracing all that she was, light and dark alike. The years passed, and Lily's role as the keeper of the lighthouse continued. The balance between light and dark was never perfect, but it was hers to maintain. The shadows would always return, as they always had, but Lily knew how to face them now. With each storm, with each challenge, she grew stronger, more in tune with the lighthouse and its power. She had become more than just a keeper. She was a guardian of balance, a protector of the light and the dark. And as the years went on, Lily understood one thing above all else: no matter how fierce the storm, no matter how dark the shadows, the light would always return. The lighthouse would stand tall, its beacon shining for all who needed it. One evening, as Lily walked along the shore, she noticed something unusual: a faint glow on the horizon. It wasn't the sun setting, nor was it the typical lighthouse beam. The glow seemed wrong. It pulsed in rhythm, like a heartbeat, and it sent a chill down her spine. Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something darker than she had ever faced before. The shadows, once silent, stirred within her. They whispered warnings, their voices urgent, yet distant. Lily quickened her pace back to the lighthouse, but the glow on the horizon didn't fade. It lingered, pulling at her like a magnet. She knew she couldn't ignore it. The balance was being tested once again, but this time it felt different. Something was shifting, something beyond her understanding. As the night wore on, Lily stood at the top of the lighthouse, her eyes fixed on the mysterious glow. It flickered, then vanished, only to reappear moments later, growing brighter. It wasn't a natural light, it felt alive. The shadows whispered once more, their voices laced with fear. They spoke of an ancient force, one that had been sealed away long ago, hidden in the depths of the sea. But now it was waking. Lily felt a surge of dread flood through her. The shadows were uneasy, as if they too were afraid of what was coming. She had never seen them act like this before. The glow grew brighter, closer now. There was no mistaking it. Something ancient and powerful was heading toward the lighthouse. The air grew thick with tension, and Lily knew her time of preparation was over. She had to face whatever was coming, whether she was ready or not. The wind howled through the lighthouse, as if echoing the storm of emotions inside Lily. The glow in the distance had grown to a blinding light. It no longer flickered, it pulsed like a heartbeat, growing stronger with each passing second. The shadows, once so familiar, now felt distant, their whispers fading as though they, too, were retreating from the oncoming power. Lily stepped forward, her heart pounding. The light from the lantern flickered weakly, as if it, too, was afraid. She turned to the shadows, her only allies in this battle, but they were silent, their presence now a mere shadow of what it had been. The glow was almost upon her now. Lily knew she had no choice. She had to face the force head-on, even if it meant confronting her deepest fears. The lighthouse, once a place of refuge, now felt like a prison. The shadows whispered louder, telling her stories of the past, of the ancient force that had once ruled the seas. This force, they said, had been locked away by the very lighthouse she had sworn to protect. It had been sealed in the depths, beneath the water, to keep it from escaping and consuming everything in its path. But now the seal was weakening. Lily's hands shook as she held onto the lantern. The light seemed to flicker in response, as if it, too, sensed the danger. The shadows whispered of a prophecy of a keeper who would face the force and either restore the balance or let it consume the world. Lily realized that she was that keeper. The weight of the responsibility pressed down her chest, but there was no turning back. She had to uncover the truth and stop the ancient force before it was too late. The glow finally reached the base of the lighthouse. Lily stood at the entrance, her heart racing. The air was thick with power, the very ground beneath her feet vibrating with an ancient energy. And then, from the light, a figure emerged, tall, dark, and shrouded in an eerie mist. Its eyes gleamed like stars, cold and unfeeling, and its presence sent a shock through Lily's entire being. The shadows, once her guiding force, now seemed to cower before this figure. The figure raised one hand, and the lighthouse trembled. The very foundation of the building seemed to crack under its power. Lily took a step forward, her voice trembling as she spoke. "What do you want?" The figure's voice was like the crashing of waves against the rocks, deep and resonant. "I seek what was stolen from me," it said. "The darkness that was locked away. Now, it's time to reclaim what is mine." Lily felt the full weight of the figure's words. It was the ancient force the shadows had warned her about, the darkness that had been sealed away. But what was its purpose? Why had it come now? The figure's power was overwhelming, and Lily could feel herself being pulled into the abyss of its presence. But she could also feel something else, the light, faint but strong within her. She had a choice. She could either embrace the darkness and let it consume the world, or she could stand firm, using the light to push back. The lantern in her hand flickered once more, its light weak but resolute. Lily closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and made her choice. She would stand for the light, for the balance. No matter how strong the darkness, she would fight to keep the shadows at bay. With her heart racing, Lily gripped the lantern tightly. The light within it seemed to respond to her determination, growing brighter in the face of the overwhelming darkness. The figure in front of her stepped closer, its presence suffocating. But Lily stood firm, refusing to back down. She raised the lantern, its light now a beacon against the encroaching darkness. The ground beneath her feet shook as the force lashed out, trying to extinguish the light. The shadows around her twisted and writhed, their voices urging her to flee. But Lily's resolve only grew stronger. She had to stop the darkness, no matter the cost. With a single, defiant cry, she thrust the lantern forward, unleashing its full power. As the lantern's light surged forward, it clashed with the dark figure's power. A blinding flash filled the air, and for a moment everything went silent. The lighthouse seemed to tremble, as if it were caught between two worlds. Lily felt the overwhelming pull of both forces, light and darkness, battling for control. But she did not falter. The lantern's light was hers to command, and she would use it to protect the lighthouse and the world beyond. The figure in front of her hissed in fury as the light pushed it back. It wasn't enough to banish the darkness, but it was a start. Lily knew the battle was far from over. The figure would return, stronger than before, but she would be ready. The shadows around her whispered, their voices filled with a strange reverence. The light was stronger than they had anticipated, and perhaps, just perhaps, there was hope. As Lily steadied herself, a strange sensation washed over her. It was as if an unseen hand had reached out from the darkness, trying to pull her into its depths. She could feel the cold touch on her skin, seeping into her bones, threatening to weaken her resolve. But then something shifted. A warmth spread from the lantern, encircling her in a protective glow. The shadows recoiled, and the figure before her faltered. The darkness could not touch her as long as the light burned within her. Lily's heart pounded in her chest, but she held her ground. She had become the keeper of the lighthouse, the guardian of the light, and she would not allow the darkness to consume her or the world around her. The dark figure, now more determined than ever, lunged toward her with a roar of fury. The ground cracked beneath its feet as it reached for the lantern. But Lily was faster. She twisted the lantern, and a beam of light shot out, striking the figure in the chest. It staggered back, screeching in pain. The shadows around it writhed and hissed, their form shifting like liquid. But the light was not finished. Lily felt a surge of power flow through her, the strength of the lighthouse itself coursing through her veins. She was not alone in this fight. The spirit of the lighthouse, the force that had protected it for generations, was with her. She could feel its presence, guiding her, lending her strength. Together, they would defeat the darkness once and for all. The figure roared in rage as it tried to strike again, but the light from the lantern grew stronger, pushing it back further. The shadows hissed, retreating into the corners of the lighthouse. Lily's heart raced as she focused every ounce of her energy on the lantern. She would not let the darkness win. With a final, desperate cry, the figure lunged at her one last time. But Lily was ready. She threw the lantern forward, and the light erupted in a brilliant burst, engulfing the figure in its radiance. The darkness screamed as it was torn apart by the pure light. For a moment, the air was still, and then, with a final gust of wind, the darkness was gone. The lighthouse stood silent once more. The glow of the lantern faded, its light soft and steady, like a beacon of hope. The figure was no more, and the shadows that had once whispered with fear were gone. Lily looked around, her heart still pounding, but there was a sense of peace now, as if the world had been restored to balance. She stepped outside, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. The sea, once dark and foreboding, now shimmered with the colors of the morning. Lily smiled, feeling the weight of the battle lift from her shoulders. The lighthouse was safe, the darkness was gone, and the world would be at peace for now. But she knew she would always be ready, guarding the light, guarding the balance, as long as the shadows remained. The night had passed, and the lighthouse now stood quietly against the rising sun. Lily stood at its entrance, feeling the cool breeze brush against her face. The battle was over, but a deep, uneasy feeling lingered within her. The darkness might have been defeated, but something told her that the world would never be the same again. The shadows had been more than just a threat, they were a warning. She glanced back toward the lighthouse. The faint glow from the lantern had dimmed, but its presence still filled her with a sense of comfort. It was no longer a tool of battle, but a symbol of resilience. For the first time, Lily understood the true weight of her role. She was the protector, the one who kept the light burning, ensuring that the darkness never returned. As Lily turned to leave the lighthouse, she heard a rustling sound behind her. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly turned, eyes scanning the surroundings. To her surprise, there was no one there. Yet, The air seemed to shimmer with an energy she could not explain. It was as if someone was watching her. Before she could process the feeling, a figure appeared at the edge of the cliffs. A tall man cloaked in shadows, his face hidden beneath a dark hood. He stood still, as if waiting for something or someone. Lily's instinct told her to be cautious, but something about him drew her in. He stepped forward slowly, his presence both unsettling and intriguing. The cloaked man spoke, his voice low and soft, but carrying a weight that sent chills down Lily's spine. "The battle you fought was only one chapter," he said. "The darkness you faced was just a fragment of a much larger force. There are others, waiting, watching. You may have won today, but the true fight has just begun." Lily's heart raced. She had thought the threat was over, but this stranger's words echoed in her mind, dark and heavy. He raised a hand, as if to emphasize his warning. "You have the strength to protect the lighthouse, but you cannot do it alone. There are others out there who will try to bring the darkness back. You must find them before they find you." Days passed, and the unease that had settled in Lily's heart only grew. She could not shake the feeling that the cloaked man's warning was more than just a figment of her imagination. The shadows that had once threatened the lighthouse had returned in whispers, and with them, an unsettling sense of anticipation. The world had changed, and so had she. One evening, as Lily explored the lighthouse's hidden chambers, she discovered something she had never noticed before: an old journal, its pages yellowed with age. It was filled with cryptic notes and strange symbols, along with drawings of the lighthouse. But there was one passage that caught her eye. It spoke of a powerful force that had once been sealed away, hidden beneath the lighthouse. Could this be the darkness the stranger had spoken of? Was it still there, waiting for the right moment to rise again? Lily closed the journal, her hands trembling. The secrets of the lighthouse were more than she had ever imagined, and now she understood that her role was far from over. The stranger's warning had been real, and the battle she had fought was only the beginning. The darkness had not been destroyed, it had only been delayed. The shadows stirred once more, as if sensing her realization. The wind picked up, carrying with it whispers from the past. Lily stood at the edge of the lighthouse, staring out at the vast ocean. A storm was coming. She could feel it in her bones. And this time, she would not face it alone. The true battle was about to begin, and she was ready to face whatever came her way. Lily stood at the edge of the lighthouse, the wind howling around her, as if the very earth was warning her of the coming storm. The shadows she had fought before were not gone, merely waiting, growing stronger with each passing day. She could feel their presence, like a dark cloud gathering in the distance, pulling her towards something unknown. She knew she had to act before it was too late. The journal she had found spoke of an ancient ritual, one that could either seal the darkness away for good or set it free forever. But the ritual required more than just the strength of the lighthouse. It required a sacrifice, a price that would weigh heavily on her heart. Still, Lily had no choice. She had been chosen, and she would face whatever came next. As Lily pored over the pages of the journal, she discovered more about the ritual. The words were cryptic and difficult to understand, but one thing became clear: the ritual could only be performed during the eclipse, when the light of the moon and sun met in perfect alignment. The eclipse was only a few days away, and she had little time to prepare. The book spoke of a hidden chamber beneath the lighthouse, a place where the ritual could be completed. But the path to the chamber was not easy. It was guarded by tests, both physical and spiritual, meant to test the heart of the one who sought to perform the ritual. Lily's heart pounded as she read the final lines, "Only the pure of heart may pass through the trials. Those who falter shall be consumed by the darkness." Determined to follow through, Lily descended into the lighthouse's lower levels. The walls were damp and cold, and the air was thick with the scent of salt water. She knew the hidden chamber was somewhere beneath, waiting for her to find it. As she moved deeper into the shadows, the faintest glimmer of light caught her eye. A door, ancient and covered in runes, stood before her. Lily hesitated for a moment, but the voice of the cloaked stranger echoed in her mind, "You cannot face this alone. The shadows will follow, but they are not your only enemies." Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The room inside was empty, except for a pedestal in the center, upon which lay a small, glowing stone. It was the key to the ritual, but also a test of her strength. She knew this was only the beginning of what lay ahead. Lily reached for the glowing stone, but as her fingers brushed against it, the ground beneath her trembled. A deep, rumbling voice filled the chamber. To claim the power of the stone, you must first face your deepest fear. The walls around her seemed to shift, and suddenly she found herself standing in a dark, endless void. The shadows she had fought before loomed large, their eyes glowing with malice. The darkness pressed in around her, whispering the worst of her memories, her fear of failure, her doubts about her ability to protect the lighthouse, and her overwhelming sense of loneliness. Lily fought against the feeling, focusing on the light within her. She could not let the shadows win. With a burst of willpower, she pushed through the fear, reclaiming her strength. The shadows recoiled, and the void disappeared, leaving only the glowing stone before her. With the stone in hand, Lily felt a surge of energy flow through her. But as soon as she gripped it, the room shifted again. This time she stood before a great chasm, with nothing but darkness stretching as far as she could see. The second trial had begun. A voice echoed from the depths, "To cross the chasm, you must trust in the light. Doubt will only bring you harm." Lily hesitated. The chasm seemed endless, and the darkness beyond it felt suffocating. But she had no choice. She closed her eyes, focusing on the warmth of the lantern's light in her heart. Slowly, she stepped forward, trusting that the light would guide her. As her foot touched the edge of the chasm, a glowing bridge appeared beneath her, solidifying with each step she took. Her faith in the light had carried her across, and she emerged on the other side, closer to her goal. The third and final trial awaited her. Before her stood a great door, adorned with intricate carvings of the moon and sun. The voice from the darkness returned, this time more menacing. "To open this door, you must give up what you hold most dear. Only then can you proceed." Lily's heart sank. She had already given so much, could she sacrifice even more? Her mind raced as she thought about everything she had lost and everything she was willing to protect. The lighthouse, her purpose, and the peace she had worked so hard to preserve. The door would not open until she made her choice. With a heavy heart, Lily whispered to the darkness, "I give up my fear. I choose the light." The door creaked open, revealing the path to the chamber where the ritual would take place. Lily stepped into the chamber, her heart racing. The air felt heavy, charged with energy, as if the very walls were waiting for her to complete the ritual. At the center of the room stood a stone altar, bathed in the eerie glow of the full moon. The stone in her hand pulsed with a strange rhythm, as if it were alive, calling her closer. She knew this was the place where everything would either be sealed or lost forever. Around her, the shadows seemed to twist and coil as though they were watching, waiting for any mistake. The journal had said the ritual would require her to combine the powers of the stone with the light of the moon. But something was different now. The shadows were not retreating, they were gathering, drawn to the altar, sensing the ritual's energy. Lily had to act quickly. As Lily approached the altar, the shadows swirled around her, growing darker and more oppressive. The whispers returned, louder now, their words distorted and full of malice. "You think you can banish us so easily? We are the darkness that lives in every heart." The voice seemed to come from all directions, 1,000 echoes blending into one. Lily's hands trembled as she placed the glowing stone onto the altar. She could feel the pressure of the darkness closing in, suffocating her. But she remembered the trials, the tests of strength, faith, and sacrifice. She couldn't let the shadows win. With a deep breath, she focused on the light, recalling the warmth it had given her. She closed her eyes and spoke the words from the journal, the ancient incantation that would bind the stone's power to the moonlight. The moment Lily spoke the final words, a brilliant light erupted from the stone, casting long, harsh shadows across the chamber. The shadows recoiled, hissing in pain as the light burned through them. The moon outside seemed to grow brighter, its rays streaming through the high windows and illuminating the stone altar. The energy in the room intensified, making the very air crackle. Lily's heart pounded in her chest as she felt the power of the ritual flow through her. But just as she thought she had succeeded, a great roar filled the chamber. The shadows reared up, more powerful than before, as though the light had awakened something darker. Lily stumbled back, the stone in her hand vibrating uncontrollably. She knew the ritual had not yet reached its climax. She had to finish it before the darkness could consume her. The shadows twisted and writhed, forming into dark figures with glowing eyes, their faces twisted in anger and desperation. They circled around Lily, whispering dark promises in her ears. "You cannot defeat us, child. We are the forgotten ones, the shadows that were cast aside. Join us, and you will have power beyond your imagination." The voice was seductive, pulling at her deepest desires, tempting her with the strength to protect the lighthouse forever. Lily's hand shook as she clutched the stone. The shadows promised her power, but she knew it came at a cost. The very essence of her soul would be bound to the darkness forever. She could feel the weight of their words, and for a moment doubt crept into her mind. But she remembered her purpose, the lighthouse, the people she loved, and the light that had always guided her. She couldn't let the darkness win. Lily pushed forward, focusing all her energy on the stone. The whispers of the shadows grew louder, but she refused to listen. She spoke the final incantation, a command to bind the darkness to the stone, to trap it away forever. As the words left her lips, a pulse of blinding light shot out from the altar, engulfing the room. The shadows screamed in fury, their forms dissolving into the light, but they fought back with all their might. Lily felt as though her very soul was being torn in two. The light and darkness clashed within her, the power of both forces struggling for control. She cried out, summoning the last of her strength. With a final surge of will, she pushed the darkness into the stone, sealing it away for good. The room went silent, the light slowly fading, until all that remained was the soft glow of the moon. Lily collapsed onto the cold stone floor, exhausted but victorious. The shadows were gone, their whispers silenced, their power sealed within the stone. The chamber was peaceful now, the oppressive energy replaced by a quiet stillness. The moonlight shone through the windows, casting a gentle glow on the altar. Lily's heart was heavy, but she knew she had done what was necessary. She slowly stood up, looking around the chamber. The shadows that had haunted the lighthouse for so long were no more. The air felt fresh, and the lighthouse seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Lily smiled faintly, knowing that her journey had come to an end. But as she walked out of the chamber, she couldn't shake the feeling that, even though the darkness was sealed away, it was not truly gone. There would always be shadows to face, but for now, the lighthouse was safe. As Lily made her way out of the chamber, the first rays of dawn crept through the cracks in the walls. The storm had finally passed, and the oppressive darkness that had plagued the lighthouse for so long was no more. She stood at the entrance, gazing out at the horizon, where the ocean met the sky. The calm waters sparkled in the morning light, a symbol of the peace she had fought so hard to restore. But even as she basked in the newfound tranquility, a nagging feeling lingered in the back of her mind. She had sealed the shadows away, but she couldn't shake the thought that something was still out there waiting. The whispers had stopped, but their echoes remained in the silence. Lily knew that her journey was far from over. There would always be challenges, new shadows to face, but for now she had won this battle. As Lily walked through the lighthouse, she noticed the familiar rooms and the worn paths she had walked for so many years. Everything seemed unchanged, yet there was a new air of mystery to it. The walls no longer felt haunted, but as if they had witnessed something greater than themselves. She had fulfilled the ancient role of the keeper, not just of the lighthouse, but of the light that had guided so many through the dark. She paused in front of the old keeper's journal. It lay on the table, its pages yellowed with age, but the words were still clear. The final entry in the journal spoke of a time when the darkness would return, but it also spoke of a guardian who would rise to stop it. Lily realized that she had become that guardian. The weight of her responsibility was heavy, but she understood now that it was a role she had been destined to fulfill. Later that evening, as the sun set and the shadows grew long, Lily stood in the tower, looking out at the sea. The waves crashed against the rocks below, but the lighthouse remained steady, its beam of light cutting through the darkness. It was a beacon, not just for sailors, but for anyone lost in the shadows of their own fears. Lily knew the lighthouse would always be a place of refuge, but she was no longer just its keeper. She was its protector, guarding against the unseen forces that lurked in the dark corners of the world. The shadows had tried to claim the lighthouse, but they had failed. And as she stood there, watching the horizon, Lily felt a quiet sense of peace. The battle was over for now. The days passed, and life in the lighthouse returned to a peaceful rhythm. Yet, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there. The whispers had stopped, but the shadows had not fully disappeared. In the quiet of the night, when the wind howled through the cracks of the lighthouse, she sometimes thought she heard them again, soft, distant whispers, just beyond the reach of her understanding. She would stand by the windows, watching the moon rise over the ocean, wondering if the darkness would ever return. But Lily was not afraid. She had faced the shadows before, and she would do so again if necessary. For now, though, she kept watch, knowing that the light would always shine as long as she was there to protect it. One night, as Lily stood by the tower, the wind carried with it a strange chill, unlike any she had felt before. It was as if something from the depths of the ocean was reaching out to her, calling her name. The whispers she had once sealed away seemed to return, but this time they were different, more urgent, more desperate. The stone she had used to seal the darkness pulsed in her pocket, reminding her of the power she had wielded. She took it out and held it in her hands, watching as it began to glow faintly. The shadows were stirring again, but this time they were not alone. There was something new, something more ancient and more powerful than anything she had faced before. Lily knew that her journey was not over, it was only just beginning. With a deep breath, Lily tucked the stone back into her pocket, feeling its pulse against her skin. The lighthouse, once a place of simple light, had become the center of something much larger, something far older. The shadows were always watching, and the secrets of the ocean still called to her. But she was no longer the same woman who had first arrived at the lighthouse. She had faced the darkness and survived. Now, she was ready for whatever came next. As the night grew darker and the wind picked up, Lily knew that the shadows would always be there, lurking just beyond the edge of the light. But she was no longer afraid. The path ahead was uncertain, but as long as the lighthouse stood, she would be there to guard it. And with that, she turned toward the depths of the unknown, ready for the next chapter of her journey. Lily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the lighthouse than she had uncovered. While the shadows she had faced seemed to have retreated, the air was thick with mystery, as if the building itself was hiding something from her. One evening, as she explored a forgotten corner of the lighthouse, she found an old, dust-covered door that had never caught her attention before. It was small and barely visible, hidden beneath the overgrowth of the lighthouse's neglected walls. Curiosity overcame her, and Lily reached for the rusty handle. As the door creaked open, a dark, narrow stairwell appeared, leading deeper into the foundation of the lighthouse. The air down here was stale, and the silence was almost deafening. Lily hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, knowing that whatever lay ahead would likely change everything. The staircase spiraled down into an underground chamber, one that seemed untouched by time. The walls were lined with old carvings, symbols she didn't recognize, and drawings of strange creatures that seemed to twist and move in the flickering light of her lantern. She stepped carefully into the chamber, her heart pounding in her chest. It felt like she was stepping into a forgotten world, one that had been buried beneath the lighthouse for centuries. In the center of the room, a large stone pedestal stood, covered in dust. As Lily approached it, the ground beneath her feet seemed to vibrate slightly, almost as if the chamber itself was alive. The pedestal had a strange marking on it, one that matched the symbol she had seen on the walls. Could this be the source of the darkness she had been fighting all along? Lily reached out and touched the pedestal. As her fingers brushed against the stone, she felt a sharp, electric shock run through her, and for a moment, the entire chamber seemed to shift. A hidden compartment in the pedestal slid open, revealing a small, ancient artifact of black stone, similar to the one she had used to seal away the shadows. The artifact radiated a cold, unsettling energy, and Lily's instincts screamed at her to leave it alone. But the artifact called to her, its power drawing her in. She picked it up slowly, her hand trembling as she held it in the light. For a moment, the shadows in the room seemed to twist around her, whispering dark secrets that she couldn't quite understand. It was as if the artifact held the key to something far more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. The moment Lily grasped the artifact, a low rumble echoed through the walls of the lighthouse. It was as if the very earth beneath her was waking up from a long slumber. The whispers grew louder, filling her mind with fragmented images and voices from the past visions of the lighthouse's original keeper, who had tried and failed to control the darkness. Lily could feel the power of the artifact coursing through her, the shadows awakening once more. But this time they were different, darker, more ancient. The lighthouse had been built to keep them at bay, but now it seemed as though the very foundation of the building was being tested. The shadows that had once seemed like a distant threat were now closing in, their grip tightening around her. As the shadows gathered, Lily felt a familiar presence behind her, as though someone was watching her. She spun around, heart racing, but saw nothing. Yet, the feeling of being followed, of something lurking just out of sight, remained. Her instincts told her that she wasn't alone down here, not in the way she had expected. From the corner of the chamber, a soft, almost imperceptible sound emerged, a whisper, a murmur of words. Lily strained to hear, but the language was unfamiliar. It was then that she realized the whispers weren't just voices from the past, they were calling to her, reaching out with the same darkness that had once consumed the lighthouse. The shadows weren't merely remnants of the past, they were alive, and they were growing stronger. Lily stood frozen, the artifact still in her hand, as the shadows closed in. The whispers were now a constant presence in her mind, urging her to surrender to their will. The weight of her responsibility pressed heavily on her, but she knew that the time for fear was over. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. The artifact in her hand began to pulse, its energy flowing into the very core of the lighthouse. Lily could feel the darkness and light battling for control, each side pulling at her, each side demanding her allegiance. It was a fight that would decide the fate of the lighthouse and perhaps her own soul. The choice was hers: embrace the darkness and risk losing everything, or stand firm and fight for the light. The decision weighed heavily on Lily's heart. She felt the pull of the shadows, their power promising freedom and release from the constant fear she had been battling. But at the same time, she could feel the light inside her, a faint, flickering flame, urging her to stand strong. The artifact pulsed violently in her hand, its cold energy seeping into her bones. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and pushed back against the darkness with every ounce of strength she had left. The shadows hissed, their whispers growing louder, but Lily stood her ground. She had come here to end the curse, to stop the shadows once, and for all not to become their vessel. The struggle within her was intense, as if her very soul was being torn in two. Just when it seemed like the darkness would overtake her, something unexpected happened. The artifact in her hand began to glow with an inner light, a warm, golden hue that contrasted with the surrounding shadows. The shadows recoiled, their hold weakening as the light spread throughout the chamber. Lily gasped as she felt a surge of power within her, a force she had never known existed. It wasn't just the artifact that had power, it was her. She realized that the true strength had always been inside her, waiting to be awakened. The light in her heart, combined with the energy of the artifact, was powerful enough to push back the darkness that had haunted the lighthouse for centuries. With newfound strength, Lily raised the artifact high above her head. The shadows writhed and hissed, but they could not withstand the light. As the artifact's glow grew brighter, the walls of the chamber began to crack, and the shadows were torn apart, disintegrating into nothingness. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and Lily could feel the entire lighthouse shaking, as if it were coming to life. The power she wielded was immense, but it was also dangerous. She knew that if she wasn't careful, The balance between light and darkness could be shattered forever. The artifact pulsed again, but this time it was no longer a call to darkness, it was a call to freedom. The chamber erupted in a blinding light as Lily focused all her energy on the artifact. The shadows screamed, their forms dissolving into the air, unable to fight the light. But just as she thought the battle was over, a shadowy figure emerged from the corner of the room, one that she recognized all too well, the keeper of the lighthouse. His form was tall and imposing, his eyes glowing with a fiery intensity. He stepped forward, a dark energy radiating from him. "You cannot stop what has already begun," he growled, his voice deep and resonant. But Lily was no longer afraid. She had the power now, and she wasn't going to let him or the shadows control her. Lily faced the keeper with unwavering resolve. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said, her voice steady and strong. The keeper snarled, his form flickering between solid and shadow. "You don't understand," he hissed. "I was bound to this place, bound by a curse that never ends. I did what I had to do to survive. And now, so will you." His form shifted again, and for a moment Lily saw the sorrow in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by rage. The keeper lunged at her, but Lily was faster. With a swift motion, she raised the artifact high, releasing a wave of light that sent him staggering back. The shadows around him recoiled, as if they, too, feared the power Lily now controlled. The keeper's form faded into the shadows, his body unable to withstand the light any longer. Lily stood alone in the chamber, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. The darkness had been defeated, but the victory came at a great cost. The lighthouse began to crumble, its walls falling apart as the curse was finally broken. But as the dust settled and the shadows were vanquished, a sense of peace washed over Lily. The battle had been won, and the lighthouse, though damaged, was no longer a place of fear. For the first time in ages, the air was still, and the oppressive weight of the darkness had lifted. The light she had awakened inside herself was now a beacon of hope, not just for her, but for anyone who had ever been trapped in the shadow's grasp. The lighthouse, once a place of terror, now stood as a symbol of freedom and strength. The air was still, and the darkness had finally lifted from the lighthouse. Lily stood at the heart of the crumbling structure, the weight of the past few days slowly lifting from her shoulders. The sun was beginning to rise on the horizon, casting a warm, golden light over the once dreaded lighthouse. It was the dawn of a new era, not just for her, but for the place that had haunted her dreams for so long. As she walked out of the chamber, the debris and ruins from the battle faded into the background. The whispers had stopped, and the shadows that once lurked in every corner had vanished. The lighthouse was no longer a prison, it was a place of healing. Lily felt the calm in her heart that had eluded her for so long, and she knew that this victory would remain with her forever. As Lily stepped out of the lighthouse, the wind began to stir, and the last remnants of the shadows were carried away by the breeze. She turned to look at the lighthouse one last time. In the distance, a figure appeared, emerging from the wreckage. It was the keeper, or rather, what remained of him. His form was no longer the towering, shadowy figure of darkness, it was faint, like a ghost. "I am free," the keeper whispered softly, his voice echoing in the wind. "The curse has been broken. But remember, Lily, it was your light that set me free. Never forget what you've done here with that." The keeper's form dissolved into the air, leaving behind only a whisper in the wind. Lily stood in silence, absorbing his words. Lily smiled softly as the keeper's presence faded, knowing that he was finally at peace. The shadows had been banished, the curse had been broken, and the lighthouse was no longer a place of fear and darkness. She turned away and walked toward the path leading down from the lighthouse, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. The world outside was still, peaceful, and filled with the promise of a new beginning. She had faced the darkness, confronted her deepest fears, and emerged victorious. Now, she was ready to embrace the future. The whispers of the past would no longer haunt her. The light within her had triumphed, and it would shine forever. The journey down the winding path from the lighthouse felt surreal. The wind was gentle, and the trees seemed to sway with a rhythm that matched the calm in Lily's heart. The shadows had gone, but there was something else now, a peace that filled the space once occupied by fear. As she reached the edge of the forest, Lily looked back at the lighthouse, which now stood quietly, no longer an ominous figure against the sky. It was a symbol of what she had overcome. When she returned to the village, the people greeted her with open arms, unaware of the darkness she had faced. Lily had become a quiet hero, her story unspoken but felt in the air, like the wind that whispered through the trees. She carried the light inside her, and wherever she went, the shadows would never follow again. The days passed in quiet reflection. Though the villagers celebrated her return, Lily knew the peace she had found wasn't just for herself. The lighthouse had held secret stories of those who had come before, trapped in the grip of the shadows. Some of the elders spoke of legends, tales of the keeper's curse, and how it had twisted the very heart of the lighthouse for centuries. Yet, they never knew the full extent of the power hidden within the artifact. Lily spent many quiet hours by the shores of the sea, thinking of all she had learned. She wondered about the future of the lighthouse, now free from the grip of darkness. Could it become a place of hope, as it had once been? Or would its haunting past continue to linger in the whispers of the wind? As time passed, Lily realized that the lighthouse, though no longer cursed, was still an important part of her journey. She felt a deep calling to return, to ensure that the light she had awakened would never fade. The village could be a peaceful place, but the lighthouse needed to stand as a reminder of what had been overcome and what could never again be allowed to take hold. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Lily made her way back to the lighthouse. The path, now familiar, felt different this time. It wasn't filled with fear or anticipation, but with a sense of purpose. She had freed the keeper, destroyed the shadows, and had become the protector of the light. Now her journey was to watch over it, to ensure that its light would continue to shine, not just for her, but for all who might one day seek its glow. Standing at the base of the lighthouse once more, Lily felt a sense of unity between herself and the place. The winds whispered in the trees, and she could hear the distant sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below. The keeper's words echoed in her mind, reminding her that it was her light that had broken the curse. She could feel his presence, not as a shadow, but as a soft, gentle whisper of thanks. Lily knew that the lighthouse was now a place of balance. The shadows had been driven away, but the keeper's legacy lived on. It was no longer a place of haunting, but a place of remembrance, a place where the light shone brighter than the darkness ever could. And as long as she was there, the shadows would never return. Lily's heart felt full as she stood before the lighthouse, watching the first stars twinkle in the evening sky. The journey had been long, and the battles had been fierce, but she had emerged stronger than she could have ever imagined. She had freed the lighthouse, the keeper, and herself from the shadows. The peace she now felt was something she had fought hard for, and it was a peace worth protecting. With a final look at the lighthouse, Lily made a promise to herself to keep the light alive, to protect it for future generations, and to never let the darkness return. As she turned to leave, the wind seemed to carry a soft whisper, a message of gratitude from the keeper. The story of the lighthouse had come to an end, but its legacy would live on forever, carried in the whispers of the wind and the light of the stars. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful journey tonight. We hope this story helped calm your mind and guide you into a restful sleep. If you enjoyed the tale, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss out on our soothing stories. And if you have any favorite stories you'd love to hear, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to bring them to life for you. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the night wrap you in its calm embrace. Sweet dreams, and we'll see you again for another peaceful adventure.